So I want to make sure that it would be great if I could have them next to each other, but that's not always... So I want to make sure it's not always doable. No, actually, that's not too bad there. I can have them right next to each other. There we go. Okay. All right. We are live. Welcome to another stream. We are going to be reading today The Two Towers, being the second part of The Lord of the Rings. And we're continuing where we left off, which is book 4, the second half of The Two Towers. So that's pretty great. Let me go ahead and just work on getting the word out real quick, and then we'll get this going. So just give me a moment to set that up. Oh, look at that. I need the URL for YouTube, though. There we go. Okay. Got that. Okay, there we go. Hey, Dylan, how goes it? How are you today? How's everything over there? I should play some music while we're waiting here, don't you think? Let me get that going. I really don't feel like I don't want to have nothing in the background. Double reading stream this month, yes. That's just because you know, there's like 5 Thursdays this month. Because the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. So I was going to have to double up either on reading or doubling up on the game. And I'm going to talk about that game stream we did, The Two Towers, a little bit, because there have been some behind the scenes things going on there that we're going to have to talk about. Let me just go ahead and yeah, right. Let me go ahead and finish posting about being live, and then I'll address that. Because last week's stream was a lot of fun, but it was only fun while I was streaming. Afterwards, it was a nightmare. So I have to minimize and mitigate the nightmareness of it all. There's the devilry of Isengard out here. Okay, and let me just go to social media real quick. I can do that on this window. There we go. But yeah, I'm gonna explain what's going on with the playthrough. Oh, God. Have I ever mentioned how much I loathe Twitter? just in case you haven't heard it before. I loathe Twitter. I should just not even have a one anymore. I don't even know why I bother. Social media is just the absolute worst sometimes. Hey, WT, how's it going? Oh, you're watching on both. That's interesting. Cool. Yeah. So last week, we started a playthrough of The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. And that's not what we're doing today. We're reading the book today. So I have it right here. And the issue is really that I knew there was going to be a problem with copyright. Mostly for the fact that the game shows several scenes from the movie. And I knew that was going to be a problem because it was going to get just automatically detected. And, and possibly they would take away the monetization, or they would block it or something. And I wasn't prepared for there to be, on last week's live on YouTube, 12 separate claims, which means that to fight that, to appeal the decisions and all that, I have to do it 12 separate times, which is just awful. It's just awful when you're trying to get things done, and it was just terrible going through it. And I solicited some advice from people that I knew. And because it's not just, getting the claims and then fighting them and all that. And really the impact is not only that I can't monetize it, the content on YouTube, but I also can't, it can't be shown in certain countries. Now, to be fair, those countries are Russia and Belarus, which are primarily non-English speaking places where they probably wouldn't be looking for English-speaking analyses of, a video game or, Tolkien in general. But I would have to go through this every time, and not just with the Two Towers, with the Return of the King as well. So I said, well, what do I do? Do I have to sit here and fight it each time, or what? How am I going to handle this? Hey, Moogle. So, what was decided, it was the advice that I was given, which I really didn't like it when I heard it, even though I knew that it was most likely the wisest course to take. And what I decided on doing is that the lives on demand, on Twitch they're called VODs, and on Twitch you could watch it without any issues. They're fully monetized on Twitch. There's no copyright issues on Twitch. Unfortunately, I can't keep them up there forever. They expire after a while. It's not like YouTube where you can keep it up there sort of forever. I could highlight them so that they would stay up there forever. However, the issue inherent with that is that you only have so many hours of highlighted content that you could have, and eventually you run out of it and you have to start deleting highlights. So basically that's just not a viable option. But basically, since I can't monetize the playthroughs of the Two Towers, and I won't be able to do that with the Return of the King either, and I do want to play both of these games, we're going to have to leave those on demand as members only. So basically, as soon as the live ends, they're going to be available for members to watch and nobody else. And that way, if people really want to watch them, there's two ways that you could do it. You could either join as a member, give me a very small amount of money, much less than I would make from ads, and watch them whenever you want, or just be there live, because there's no issues with it live. So that's the issue as far as I see it with that game and the next game, the Return of the King that we plan on playing. future gaming streams, it probably won't be such a big deal because there's usually not copyright claims on gameplay videos, especially if you're doing commentary. The issue specifically was that these games show scenes from the movies. And unfortunately, there is no sort of setting that you could just turn that off, because they try to do a thing where they have the movie scene transition into the in-game graphics, which when I saw it back in the day, I thought it was really cool, but now you see it and you're like, wow, there's a big difference there. So that's how it's going to have to be. I could edit out the movie scenes, but the problem is that a lot of time I'm talking during it, and you're missing out on a lot if I edit those out. Especially at the beginning when, like, the very first scene that is shown, which is, Galadriel talking about the creation of the rings, and I'm talking about what she's saying in Elvish, which is the same thing that she's saying in English. It's just, she's whispering, and I'm making it more clear what she's actually saying in the Sindarin language. So, this is just, one of those situations that happens when you're make it your business to create content for people that is based off of content that somebody else has created. In this case, it's really Tolkien, but by extension, it's also Warner Brothers and Howard Shore and Peter Jackson and all these people. And the issue, like I said, there were 12 separate claims that came through on last week's live, and the main issue really does seem to be from Warner Brothers. Hey, Alice. So, Warner Brothers they're the absolute worst when it comes to copyright on YouTube. They really are. They're the worst. I'll tell you, not even on YouTube, just in the internet in general. It's kind of surprising that they don't bother people on Twitch, but I'll tell you a funny story is that a friend of mine, Alice, you know exactly who I'm talking about. It's even worse. It'll be even worse when Netflix gets control. You're most likely there. Yeah, you're most likely correct there. Yeah, that's the problem. And they don't really care Brian, they don't really care about fair use, is what I found out. They really don't care about fair use. So you have to, I could get the claims taken off, but you have to fight tooth and nail with Warner Brothers. Meanwhile, the other claimants, the other claimants is Howard Shore, and that's just going nowhere. Like, I'm just being ignored there, which means that it would expire after, I believe it's 28 days. But Warner Brothers, I'll tell you, it's worse than that 2-second scene. I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine, and Alice and Moogle, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about right away. He's a big fan of the David Bowie song "Life on Mars," which is a really good song. And at one point, the Flaming Lips had done a cover of it, in a live cover of it. And seeing that, I thought, well, that's really cool. Let me show this to them, right? And I said, hey, look at this, because you really like this song. And they said, oh, yeah, no, I've heard that cover before. As a matter of fact, I used to have this website, and I had that cover of Life on Mars uploaded to my web server. It wasn't actually on the website, so it wasn't linked to. There was no way for anybody to access it. It was just sitting there. And Warner Brothers somehow found out about it because that they're on Warner Brothers Music, and basically issued a copyright claim against them for storing something on a web server. Hey, Matt. So, that's just kind of wild that happens, and so that's like you're not even showing that to anybody, and it's this live recording, it's not even like from an album or anything like that, So it's this live recording that was released as like this B-side, but because it's Warner Brothers Music, and They're just crazy litigious and crazy about that sort of thing, you know. And it's, you know, it's awful, but, you know, it's going to be. I'm just going to tell you guys this, right? Hey, Ted, I'm going to tell you guys this right now because eventually I'm going to want to do full breakdowns of the films. That is something that I want to do on this channel. I'm going to want to sit and go through the Lord of the Rings, and it's going to be, you know, hours and hours of content. And I'm not just talking about because the extended editions are like 11 and a half hours long. I'm talking about pausing very often to talk about everything involved, production, what they got right, what they got wrong. Let's talk about the lore. Let's talk about characterization. Let's really break it down. So when you're doing that to a work that's 11 and a half hours long, it's going to be, you know, a lot of hours of content that I'm probably not going to be able to monetize because they don't care if it's fair use. So that's why I'm going to be increasingly pushing memberships. And at that point, that might be the point where I finally break down and do Patreon, because then at least I could have the, you know, the full, like, have it like, okay, so if you want to watch the whole thing, we could put it on there, you know? Yeah. Well, the videos probably wouldn't be 4 hours long, WT, but it would be like in the entirety of the playlist, it's probably going to be, I mean, just take, you know, the 11 and a half hours that is the Lord of the Rings, and then, you know, add all of me talking, you know, and pausing it and talking and demonstrating things and occasionally pulling down the books and reading parts, you know, and intros and outros and everything. So I think that, you know, we're going to be looking at like 50 hours of stuff probably. And I'm willing to do it, right? I want to do it. That's the whole point, because we're doing it with the books right now. We want to do it with the adaptations. I did it with the Ashken Hobbit. I started to do it with the Rankin Bass Hobbit. We got to finish that at some point. It moved streaming services, so that was making it. And I did actually have a copyright claim from Netflix on that, but that got resolved quickly. They were pretty cool about it. But once they saw that it was a review and an analysis, they released it immediately. But I, you know, through having so many delays and troubles and everything, and, you know, having to get a new computer, I haven't been able to return to Rankin Bass Hobbit. But eventually, yeah, I want to do the Lord of the Rings. I want to do the Hobbit. I want to do the Rings of Power, and to just like really sit and really break all this stuff down and analyze it, you know, fully. So if I'm finding that I'm not able to monetize any of it, and then I'm basically going to be, you know, doing it with like what you said, WT, with no return on the investment, then the only sane thing to do is to there's two sane things I can do. One is to, well, that's how this started, Alice, because The Two Towers is licensed from the movies, and that we started that last week. And they gave me the 12 different claims on last week's stream. 12, that's why I started talking about this. So I'm already doing that, and I'm already, you know, running into these issues. So and none of them are from Electronic Arts. They're all it's Howard Shore and Warner Brothers. So there's only two sane things to do. One is to go the Patreon route, which I'm not like really keen on, because then it's like I'm already asking for people to like join the channel, and then it's like, oh well, now join this other thing, right? Where I could have like a very edited, slimmed down version where there's like no movie scenes and only still pictures on YouTube, and then like a more full length version on Patreon. but it's like, I feel like I'm asking people to join members and then also to do Patreon. So it's sort of like, I don't know, it feels like it's too much to ask. The other thing to do is to just have them only for members, and that might be what we might have to do if I can't monetize it, if I can't have ads on it, it's, and I want to just stress this. I mentioned this earlier, and I want to really, really stress this. Let me text Laurel, by the way. Let me not forget, because she was really looking forward to me reading the Faramir chapter. I just remembered this. Okay. The money I make from memberships is not anywhere near what I'd get from ads. So, you know what I mean? Like, it would still be taking a much, much smaller amount of money. You know what I mean? Ads are on YouTube, at least, are way better than memberships. On Twitch, it's completely reversed. You want the subscriptions, you don't want the ads. Are almost nothing there. So anyway, now that I've gotten you all up to date on that, and we've talked about that, let's go over here, and I'm gonna kill the music as well. I feel like you've all been like reasonably apprised of the situation regarding last week's stream, and therefore also the sort of future streams of games based off of the movies, at least. Hey, Chewie. Which, like I said, it won't be so much of a problem for some of them, but for the Two Towers and the Return of the King, it's rough, Thankfully, they're not very long. But it's also going to be a problem when I do eventually get into movie and TV analysis. I gotta get back. I gotta get back on that Rankin Bass Hobbit. I just haven't found the time to do it. I've been so busy with a lot of things. But welcome in, everybody. We are going to be reading The Two Towers, being the second part of The Lord of the Rings. And we are in Book 4 of The Lord of the Rings, which is the second half of The Two Towers. For those of you who don't know, I think everybody knows, but for those of you who might be watching this later who don't know, The Two Towers, like all of the volumes of The Lord of the Rings, is broken into two halves. But in this case, they basically take place simultaneously, where Book 3, which is the first half, follows primarily the focal character being Merry. But what is The Lord of the Rings? Now there's a question, right? Sauron is the Lord of the Rings. So Merry is pretty much the character that we follow throughout that section. Although there are parts where we're following Aragorn as well. And then there's the second half, which the focal character is really Sam. That's who it's really following. Sam and Frodo and Gollum, but mostly Sam. If you notice, there are parts where Frodo will go to sleep, and we know what Sam is doing. But when Sam goes to sleep, we don't know what Frodo is doing, because Sam's the one really telling the story at this point. So where we left off was, I know we did the Taming of Smeagol, and we did the Passage of the Marshes, and we did the Black Gate is Closed. And I was going to stop there, especially since we were having some technical problems with the streams disconnecting. But when everything finalized and stabilized, and I could not resist Chapter 4 of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, because it is one of my favorite chapters in the entire saga. So, hey, Spielkop on Sparta. So that brings us to Chapter 5, The Window on the West. They have met Faramir, Captain of Gondor, as well as two of his, I don't want to use the word cronies, really. That doesn't seem appropriate. Two of his compatriots, Mablung and Damrod, and Sam got to see an oliphant, which is like an elephant, but really a whole lot larger, or as they're called in the language of the South, the Mumak Hill. And hey there, Kitsa as well. Kitslihel is probably closer to how you actually say that. So here we go. Chapter 5, The Window on the West. Hold on. I think that might be Laurel. Let me just see. I heard a text, and I just want to make sure it's not important. It's not important. Okay. It seemed to Sam that he had only dozed for a few minutes when he awoke to find that it was late afternoon and Faramir had come back. He had brought many men with him. Indeed, all the survivors of the foray were now gathered on the slope nearby, 200 or 300 strong. They sat in a wide semicircle, between the arms of which Faramir was seated on the ground, while Frodo stood before him. It looked strangely like the trial of a prisoner. Sam crept out from the fern, but no one paid any attention to him, and he placed himself at the end of the rows of men, where he could see and hear all that was going on. He watched and listened intently, ready to dash to his master's aid if needed. He could see Faramir's face, which was now unmasked. It was stern and commanding, and a keen wit lay behind his searching glance. Doubt was in the grey eyes that gazed steadily at Frodo. Timothy Oliphant and Pat Oliphant. You guys. You know, honestly, whenever I hear about that actor, Timothy Oliphant, I think of the Oliphant. Sam dropping eaves. He's dropping some eaves. But notice, let's just pause here just to say, like, this is demonstrating right at the beginning of the chapter here. The point that I made is that Sam is the focal character, not Frodo, because it starts with him. The fourth word in the narration is Sam, and he was dozing. Frodo's already talking to Faramir. We don't know what they're saying because Sam doesn't know what they're saying, you know. So everybody's like, well, you know, Frodo wrote the story. Well, he wrote a lot of it. He was probably the one actually writing, but I think Sam was the one telling it to him. Sam was probably the one with the better memory, at least. You know. Oh my God, yeah. Sam knowing all the juicy Shire is what I'm sure you meant to say. The juicy Shire gossip. Well, think about it, Dylan. What was the very first scene in The Lord of the Rings? A bunch of hobbits at a bar gossiping, you know, about Bilbo. And other things, too, like, you know, walking trees and all sorts of rumors and such, but mostly about Bilbo. Sam soon became aware that the captain was not satisfied with Frodo's account of himself at several points. What part he had to play in the company that set out from Rivendell, why he had left Boromir, and where he was now going. In particular, he returned often to Isildur's Bane. Plainly he saw that Frodo was concealing from him some matter of great importance. But it was at the coming of the halfling that Isildur's Bane should awaken. Or so one must read the words, he insisted. If then you are the halfling that was named, doubtless you brought this thing, whatever it may be, to the council of which you speak, and there Boromir saw it. Do you deny it? Frodo made no answer. So, said Faramir, I wish then to learn you more of it. For what concerns Boromir concerns me. An orc arrow slew Isildur, so far as old tales tell, but orc arrows are plenty, and the sight of one would not be taken as a sign of doom by Boromir of Gondor. Had you this thing in keeping? It is hidden, you say. But is it not because you choose to hide it? No, not because I choose, answered Frodo. It does not belong to me. It does not belong to any mortal, great or small. Though if any could claim it, it would be Aragorn, son of Arathorn, whom I named, the leader of our company from Moria to Rauros. Why so, and not Boromir, prince of the city that the sons of Elendil founded? Because Aragorn is descended in direct lineage, father to father from Isildur, Elendil's son himself. And the sword that he bears was Elendil's sword. A murmur of astonishment ran through all the ring of men. Some cried aloud, The sword of Elendil! The sword of Elendil comes to Minas Tirith, great tidings! But Faramir's face was unmoved. Maybe, he said. But so great a claim will need to be established, and clear proofs will be required should this Aragorn ever come to Minas Tirith. He had not come, nor any of your company, when I set out 6 days ago. Boromir was satisfied of that claim, said Frodo. Indeed, if Boromir were here, he would answer all your questions, and since he was already at Rhoros many days back, and intended then to go straight to your city, if you return, you may soon learn the answers there. My part in the company was known to him, as to all the others, for it was appointed to me by Elrond of Imladris himself, before the whole council. On that errand I came into this country, but it is not mine to reveal to any outside the company. Yet those who claim to oppose the enemy would do well not to hinder it. Oh, I don't know about that garlic and herb cheese spread. This sounds like my kind of thing. I don't know about that. Do tell me a bit more of that. What would be considered a state secret in the Lord of the Rings? A perfect example would be that Denethor has a Palantir. Nobody really knows about that. That's kind of his secret. We find out about it later, of course, but that's definitely a state secret that Denethor has one of the Palantir. There's a few other examples of things like that you see, such as like where the Crown of Gondor is, things like that. Even Aragorn's true name, it would be what you would consider perhaps a state secret for a country that doesn't have a state, which is Arnor right now, because that was even kept from Aragorn himself until he turned 20 years old. Now, so what we're getting here is, Faramir knows his brother is dead, and we'll find out a little bit more about that coming up. And he knows that this guy, Frodo, has been traveling with him, and that this is connected to the dream that he had about Isildur's Bane and Imladris and a halfling. But he doesn't really, he's looking for more information. He's really trying to find out, what were the exact circumstances to which his brother died. And unfortunately, Frodo really doesn't know the answer to that, because Frodo really wasn't there when Boromir died. But he also wants to know, what is this Isildur's Bane? And Frodo is basically telling him, well, that's kind of like classified, man. I can't really tell you. I'm not at liberty to discuss that. But we see that Faramir is really good at getting the truth out of people without, using any sort of like crazy tactics, So you got some of this spread, and you made a sandwich on ciabatta with black pepper, salami, and red onion and banana peppers. That sounds really good. Sounds really good. I mean, anything, you tell me garlic and herb, and I'm like, yes, please. You tell me cheese, and I'm like, that's even better. You know what I mean? All right, let's continue here. Let's see. Here we are. Frodo's tone was proud, whatever he felt, and Sam approved of it, but it did not appease Faramir. So, he said, you bid me mind my own affairs, and get me back home, let you be. Boromir will tell all when he comes. When he comes, say you, were you a friend of Boromir? Vividly before Frodo's mind came the memory of Boromir's assault upon him, and for a moment he hesitated. Faramir's eyes, watching him, grew harder. Boromir was a valiant member of our company, said Frodo at length. Yes, I was his friend for my part. Faramir smiled grimly. Then you would grieve to learn that Boromir is dead. I would grieve indeed, said Frodo. Then catching the look in Faramir's eyes, he faltered. Dead, he said. Do you mean that he is dead, and that you knew it? You have been trying to trap me in words, playing with me, or are you now trying to snare me with a falsehood? I would not snare even an orc with a falsehood, said Faramir. How then did he die, and how do you know of it, since you say that none of the company has reached the city when you left? As to the matter of his death, I had hoped that his friend and companion would tell me how it was. But he was alive and strong when we parted, and he lives still for all that I know, though surely there are many perils in the world. Many indeed, said Faramir, and treachery not the least. Sam had been getting more and more impatient and angry at this conversation. These last words were more than he could bear, and bursting into the middle of the ring, he strode up to his master's side. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Frodo," he said, "but this has gone on long enough. He's no right to talk to you so, after all you've gone through, as much for his good and all these great men as for anyone else. See here, Captain." He planted himself squarely in front of Faramir, his hands on his hips, and took the look on his face as if he were addressing a young hobbit who had offered him what he called sauce when questioned about visits to the orchard. There was some murmuring, but also some grins on the faces of the men looking on. The sight of their captain sitting on the ground and eye to eye with a young hobbit, legs well apart, bristling with wrath, was one beyond their experience. "See here," he said. "What are you driving at? Let's come to the point before all the orcs of Mordor come down on us. If you think my master murdered this Boromir and then ran away, you've got no sense, but say it and have done. And then let us know what you mean to do about it. But it's a pity that folk, as talk about fighting the enemy, can't let others do their bit in their own way without interfering. He'd be mighty pleased if he could see you now. Think he'd got a new friend, he would." I love this little speech that Sam makes. Love it, love it, love it. He's basically, talking out of turn, but in a really great way, because he sees that Frodo's kind of faltering here. Frodo's sort of dead in the water. I've got to handle this, right? And he says this is like he's speaking to Faramir, who's a little bit older than him, because he's a little bit older than him, although not that much older. When we consider the lifespan of hobbits and the lifespan of Númenórean men, Sam is the friend we all deserve is a true statement, but also Sam is the friend we should aspire to be to others as well. That's also equally important, I think. So he says, he's talking to Faramir as if he's talking to a child who is giving him sauce, which is not something that is explained, but we could glean from the context that he, is treating him as if he caught this young boy traipsing about in the orchard stealing fruit, and he's confronted him, and he says, "That lad gave me sauce," which is, I think what the word that he's trying to say is sass, but he would have his sort of country accent, sort of almost like a Cockney sort of twang, I think. And so it's coming off as sauce. So I think that he's trying to say sass. That's what I always took from this. But he says sauce. And he says, look at us. We're, you're talking about fighting the enemy. And we're doing that in our own way and in the best way that we can do. And you're giving us guff about this, or you're giving us sauce, I should say, about this. And I think Sauron would think this is pretty funny. I think he would like this and think that maybe you're kind of working for him. And now he's not necessarily accusing Faramir of being a minion of Sauron, but in doing his work for him, by hindering Frodo. That's what Sam's getting at. Now, what we're going to learn here is that Faramir has a really good sense of humor, and he's very even-tempered, and he doesn't really get angry about any of Sam's outbursts, and this won't be the last one. And he takes it all in stride. So let's continue here. "Patience," said Faramir, but without anger. "Do not speak before your master, whose wit is greater than yours, and I do not need any to teach me of our peril. Even so, I spare a brief time in order to judge justly on a hard matter. Were I as hasty as you, I might have slain you long ago, for I am commanded to slay all whom I find in this land without the leave of the Lord of Gondor. But I do not slay man or beast needlessly, and not gladly even when it is needed. Neither do I talk in vain, so be comforted, sit by your master, and be silent." What is my favorite sauce? I like barbecue sauce, but I make my own. I just made a batch today. Sam sat down heavily with a red face. Faramir turned to Frodo again. "You ask, how do I know that the son of Denethor is dead? Tidings of death have many wings. Night oft brings news To near kindred, 'tis said, Boromir was my brother. A shadow of sorrow passed over his face. Do you remember aught of special mark that the Lord Boromir bore with him among his gear? Frodo thought for a moment, fearing some further trap and wondering how this debate would turn in the end. He had hardly saved the ring from the proud grasp of Boromir, and how he would fare now among so many men warlike and strong he did not know. Yet he felt in his heart that Faramir, though he was much like his brother in looks, was a man less self-regarding, both sterner and wiser. I remember that Boromir bore a horn, he said at last. You remember well. And as one who has in truth seen him, said Faramir, then maybe you could see it in your mind's eye. A great horn of the wild ox of the east, bound with silver and written with ancient characters. That horn the eldest son of our house has borne for many generations. And it is said, if it be blown, that any need, anywhere within the bounds of Gondor, as the realm was of old, his voice will not pass unheeded. So, let's talk about the horn briefly. I did a dive into this last year, maybe around the summer or so. The horn is really interesting. It's the horn of Gondor, and he mentions that the in the line of the stewards, which is descended from a guy named Hurin of Emen Arin, not to be confused with Hurin Stallion, although they both had sons named Hurin, which can get confusing. Who is not the first steward of Gondor, but the first in the dynasty that leads down to Faramir. And what's really interesting is that we aren't told whether or not there was any dynastic aspect of the stewards before that, but we know that they were appointed by the kings. And it just sort of became a tradition to appoint Hurin's descendants as stewards. So, that leads to, Ecthelion and, not to be confused with Ecthelion from the fall of Gondolin, and of course Denethor, and then it would have been Boromir, but of course he's passed away. We don't know exactly how long the horn has been around, but his description of it is interesting. I'm going to highlight a certain spot here where he said, a great horn of the wild ox of the east. So, in the eastern lands of Middle-earth, which are, the land that we would call Rhûn. Rhûn just means east. It's the eastern lands. There are these creatures called the Kine of Arra, and I remember I got a Quora question about what are the Kine of Arra exactly, And Kine is really just an old-fashioned term for ox. Arra, though, is the Westron form of the name of one of the Valar, who he knew as Oroma. So Oroma, he raised these cattle in Middle-earth at some point, and their descendants, the Kine of Arra, one of their horns became Boromir's horn. So it makes this connection between the stewards and the Valar, which is really interesting. And of course, it's just interesting that when the Valar decide to send a message, they send it to Faramir. And they sent it to him a few times before they were like, all right, let's get his brother in on this as well. And a lot of people have asked, which one of the Valar was it that sent this message? We know it's the Valar because it's described as a voice out of the West. But which one? And I said, well, there's a lot of arguments that it could be Oroma because of the connection of the horn. It could be Lorien, also known as Ermo, because he's the one most associated with dreams. It could be Mandos because he's the one that makes prophecies. It could be Manwë just because he's the one in charge. I think it was an effort from multiples. I do tend to think I like the idea of Ulmo being the one that's most connected to men, to mortal men. So I think he had a say in that as well. I think that there was probably one that came up with the form of the message, and another that actually sent it, and another that wrote the actual words, and another that chose the person who was going to receive the message. So I don't think it was like a unilateral thing, Now, you think that Oroma's own horn, the Valaroma, was made from the horn of the kine of Arwa? Probably not, and I'll tell you why. The reason that I would say probably not is the one thing that you have to understand about the Valar is they are really, really big. And the way that it was described in the Book of Lost Tales and in the Silmarillion as well is that a full-sized elf lord, which is just as tall as a man, and in fact, in the first stage, they tended to be much taller back in those days. It was typical for people to be really tall, especially if they were important, would come up to about the knees of one of the Valar. So then when you start to think about how big they are, and my good friend Matt Richardson, known as Lore Master on Quora, he's the one that loves to come up with exact measurements. And he says, well, for example, Morgoth was about 30 feet tall. So then when you have to think about how big one of the Valar is, so how big would Grond, the Hammer of the Underworld, be? How big would Oroma's horn be? How big would his horse be? That sort of thing, Couldn't the kings of the Arwa just perhaps have been bigger in the past? What I think is that the kine of Arwa are probably descendants of a mixture of the special animals that they had in the Undying Lands and the animals we have in Middle-earth. That's like how also, how you can account for something like the Meris. Even like the Meris, Shadowfax is a Meris. Meris is just a really interesting word because it's really, you're just saying mare. It just means horse, and then the Oroma's horse himself is called Nehar, which was said to be adapted from Valoran world. But Nehar, the way that Oroma described it was, that's the sound he makes when he wants to ride. So really, he had a horse named Neigh, and and then from them came these horses that are called horses, right? So I think that there was probably something like Nehar that was like a really big oxen. Well, oxen is plural. A really big ox, and that at some point that blood mingled with the blood of the oxen of Middle-earth, and we get these kind of Arwa, way, way later. Nay. Well, no, more like wait. Let me type into the chat here. More like that sort of nay. All right, let's continue here. 5 days ere I set out on this venture, 11 days ago, at about this hour of the day, I heard the blowing of that horn. From the northward it seemed, but dim, as if it were but an echo in the mind. A boding of ill we thought of it, my father and I, for no tidings had we heard of Boromir since he went away, and no watcher on our borders had seen him pass. And on the third night, after another and a stranger thing befell me. I sat at night by the waters of Anduin in the grey dark under the young pale moon, watching the ever-moving stream, and the sad reeds were rustling. So do we ever watch the shores nigh Osgiliath, which our enemies now partly hold, and issue from it to harry our lands. But that night all the world slept at the midnight hour. Then I saw, or so it seemed that I saw, a boat floating on the water, glimmering grey, a small boat in a strange fashion with a high prow, and there was none to row or steer it. An awe fell on me, for a pale light was round it. But I rose and went to the bank, and began to walk out into the stream, for I was drawn toward it. Then the boat turned toward me, and stayed its pace, and floated slowly by within my hand's reach, yet I durst not handle it. It waded deep, as if it were heavily burdened, and it seemed to me that it passed under my gaze, that it was almost filled with clear water, from which came the light, and lapped in the water, A warrior lay asleep. A broken sword was on his knee. I saw many wounds on him. It was Boromir, my brother, dead. I knew his gear, his sword, his beloved face. One thing only I missed, his horn. One thing only I knew not, a fair belt, as if it were linked of golden leaves about his waist. Boromir, I cried, where is thy horn? Whither goest thou, O Boromir? But he was gone. The boat turned into the stream and passed glimmering on into the night. Dream-like it was, and yet no dream, for there was no waking. And I do not doubt that he is dead and has passed down the river to the sea. Now let's talk about this. Now, Faramir is an incredibly astute person. I mentioned that earlier. And he's very perceptive. He has a way of getting to the truth. And he's recognizing that this is something, what he experienced here was something like a dream. But he knew it wasn't a dream because he didn't wake up. So what he's essentially saying is, I know it wasn't a dream, but it wasn't really real either. Now, if we read some of Tolkien's deeper lore on the sending of messages and things like that from the Valar, we especially the book that you really want to look out on this is called The Nature of Middle-earth. There's something called the Osanwa. And Osanwa is an Elvish word, obviously. It means to send thoughts. And essentially, we would call it telepathy. But that's just sending thoughts. Now, the Valar especially, I mean, everybody has these abilities, but the Valar are the best at it. They're the ones that are the most keen on doing this sort of thing. If you have a real body, it sort of dampens your ability to both send and receive these messages. And there's all sorts of rules and laws about somebody having to be open to it, and there's a whole thing about authority and kinship, and it gets really complicated. But basically, there's also a different kind of Osanwa that is about sending visions. And what Tolkien wrote about sending visions specifically from the Ainur, the Valar and the Maiar, to mortal men is that it's almost always done when the person is sleeping. Because if they're sleeping, they'll perceive what they see as a dream. And they may see the wisdom in it. However, if you send it to a waking person, like we have here with Faramir, a lot of times they think what they're seeing is real. They don't understand that it's a vision sent from the Valar. They think what they're seeing, and they see what they're seeing, and they take it as face value, and they don't know that it's not real. And here we see Faramir, like I said, an incredibly astute person, an incredibly perceptive person who knows it's not real. He knows it's not real. And this is basically the Valar telling him that his brother has died. And he knows that it's real. Well, he knows that the vision isn't real because he said it's dreamlike, but he knows that the message is real. He knows that Boromir is really dead. And the reason he knows that Boromir is really dead is really two things. One is he doesn't have his horn, and the other is he has this weird belt. And he'd never seen a belt like that before. Now, I don't know if you guys know about this, but when we dream things, we are actually incapable of creating things in our own dreams. What I mean is every person's face that you've ever seen in a dream is a person you've seen. Even if you don't know them, your mind can't create new faces when you're asleep. Most of us can't do it when we're awake. Artists can do it. But essentially what I'm saying is for Boromir to be in this boat, dead, wounded, all these weapons, and this weird belt, and no horn, he knows it's not real, but he knows that there's a real message here. So it's this incredibly melancholy scene here because just think about it. 5 minutes ago, he was being lectured by Sam, and now he's talking about this beautiful dream he had where he found out his brother had died. Now, just touch on the films very briefly because we have to talk about the films when we talk about Faramir. Out of all the characters that they got wrong in the films, Faramir is the one they got the most wrong. They basically assassinated his character. And it served a purpose. It's not like it was done, needlessly, but I still hate it, because I like Faramir, and what they did to him was terrible. Is that Peter Jackson did not like to show a character that was going to come into the story fully realized. He wanted to show them having an arc and telling their story. Now, the important thing is it's not Faramir's story, it's Frodo's story. But that's beside the point because we're not talking about Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, we're talking about Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Faramir was just, like I said, Frodo was pretty bad. Gimli was pretty bad. Denethor was pretty bad. But the one character that they massacred, just completely mutilated, was Faramir. They did him really, really dirty. And but the one thing that they did get right was how close he was to Boromir. They really got that part right. That him and Boromir were not only were they brothers, but they were best friends. And some of that you only see in the extended version, which is fine. But you even see there's that scene in, I believe it's in The Return of the King, where there's this flashback showing Boromir and Faramir in Osgiliath being, celebrating, and then they see Denethor coming, and Boromir's just like, oh, here we go. You know what I mean? Because he knows how his father is about his brother, But anyway, let's continue here. Alas, said Frodo, that was indeed Boromir as I knew him, for the golden belt was given to him in Lothlorien by the Lady Galadriel. She it was that clothed us as you see us in elven grey. This brooch is of the same workmanship. He touched the green and silver leaf that fastened his cloak beneath his throat. Faramir looked closely at it. It is beautiful, he said. Yes, 'tis the work of the same craft. Then you passed through the land of Lorien. Lorelin, and it was named of old, but long now it has lain beyond the knowledge of men, he added softly, regarding Frodo with a new wonder in his eyes. Much that was strange about you I begin now to understand. Will you not tell me more, for it is a bitter thought that Boromir died within sight of the land of his home. No more can I say than I have said, answered Frodo, though your tale fills me with foreboding. A vision it was that you saw, I think, and no more, some shadow of evil fortune that has been or will be, unless, indeed, it is some lying trick of the enemy. I have seen the faces of fair warriors of old laid in sleep beneath the pools of the dead marshes, or seeming so by his foul arts. So now this is interesting here. So like I said, Frodo didn't know that Boromir died. And Faramir is telling him, he did die, and here's how I know. And then Frodo's actually doing something really, really interesting. And he thinks he's doing a kindness. He's saying, but what if he's not really dead? Like what if that was just something like Sauron or Saruman cooked up, and some evil vision that's not true? What is the proof that Boromir died, which we're going to get there. Nay, it was not so, said Faramir, for his works filled the heart with loathing, but my heart was filled with grief and pity. Yet how could such a thing have happened in truth, asked Frodo, for no boat could have been carried over the stony hills from Tol Brandir, and Boromir proposed to go home across the Entwash and fields of Rohan. And yet how could any vessel ride the foam of the great falls and not founder in the boiling pools, though laden with water? I know not, said Faramir, but once came the boat. From Lorien, said Frodo. In 3 such boats we rowed down Anduin to the falls. They also were of elven work. You passed through the hidden land, said Faramir, but it seems that you little understood its power. If men have dealings with the mistress of magic who dwells in the golden wood, then they may look for strange things to follow, for it is perilous for mortal man to walk out of the world of this sun. And few of old came thence unchanged, 'tis said. Boromir, oh Boromir, he cried, what did she say to you, the lady that dies not? What did she see? What woke in your heart then? Why went you ever to Laurelin Doranan, and came not by your own road upon the horses of Rohan, riding home in the morning? Then turning again to Frodo, he spoke in a quiet voice once more. Moogle, Ralph actually got a lot right, actually. He got a lot wrong, but he got a lot right. I mean, that's too big of a topic to talk about right now. But I will tell you the one thing that Ralph Bakshi got correct, that Peter Jackson got wrong, and that Amazon got wrong, and that is Galadriel. If you want to see the perfect Galadriel, just watch Ralph Bakshi's film. He knew who she was. He understood in a way that nobody else seems to get. To those questions I guess that you could not make some sooner, Frodo, son of Drogo. But not here or now, maybe. But lest you still should think my tale a vision, I will tell you this. The horn of Boromir at least returned in truth and not in seeming. The horn came, but it was cloven in two, as if by axe or sword. The shards came severely to Let's try that again. The shards came severally to shore. One was found among the reeds where the watchers of Gondor lay, northwards below the infalls of the Entwash. The other was found spinning in the flood by one who had an errand on the water. Strange chances, but murder will out, 'tis said. And now the horn of the elder son lies in two pieces upon the lap of Denethor, sitting in his high chair waiting for news. And you can tell me nothing of the cleaving of the horn? No, I did not know of it, said Frodo. But the day when you heard it blowing, if your reckoning is true, was the day when we parted, when I and my servant left the company. And now your tale fills me with dread, for if Boromir was then in peril and was slain, I must fear that all my companions perished too. And they were my kindred and my friends. Will you not put aside your doubt of me and let me go? I am weary and full of grief and afraid, but I have a deed to do or to attempt before I too am slain. And the more need of haste, if we two halflings are all that remain of our fellowship. Go back, Faramir, valiant captain of Gondor, and defend your city while you may, and let me go where my doom takes me. For me there is no comfort in our speech together, said Faramir. But you surely draw from it more dread than need be, unless the people of Lorien themselves came to him who arrayed Boromir as if for a funeral, not orcs or servants of the Nameless. Some of your company, I guess, live still. But whatever befell on the North March, you, Frodo, I doubt no longer. If hard days have made me any judge of men's words and faces, then I may make a good guess at halflings, though— and now he smiled. There is something strange about you, Frodo, an elvish air, maybe. But more lies upon our words together than I thought at first. I should now take you back to Minas Tirith to answer there to Denethor, and my life will justly be forfeit, if I now choose a course that proves ill for my city. So I will not decide in haste what is to be done. Yet we must move hence without more delay. So let's talk about something that he said here. Like I said, Faramir is extremely astute. He's extremely perceptive. And he says there's something about this guy, this Frodo, that's just really weird, right? And he knows it's specifically Frodo because it's not Sam. It's just Frodo. And he says that it's just sort of elvish. And this is something that I think Sid especially has talked about, is what it really means to be an elf friend. Now, there are a few mortals that were called elf friend in all of Legendarium. Two of them were Baggins, Bilbo and Frodo. Now, yeah, let's see who in the chat remembers, and I think I had this as a quiz, actually, in the early days of when we were doing quizzes, but Who remembers which character it was that specifically said that Frodo was an elf friend? Let's see if anybody in the chat knows that. Because when an elf tells you, I name you elf friend, it's not so much that they're giving you a title. They're recognizing something that's within you that was already there. They're not giving you something. They're just saying that it's there. No, it wasn't Aragorn, because Aragorn wouldn't have the ability to say that somebody is an elf friend, because Aragorn is not an elf. Only an elf can really say that somebody is an elf friend. They see, not Legolas. No, Legolas barely said 2 words to Frodo in the whole thing. There was like one line that he directs in Frodo's direction. No, it was before he met Legolas. I'm just going to tell you, it was Gildor and Glorian, who was pretty much the first. Yeah, that's it, Dylan. You may not have remembered his name, but it was Gildor. Gildor said, "I name you elf friend." He's not saying, I am, naming you elf friend because you've been friendly to me and you're a cool guy and I like you. He's recognizing something that's already there within Frodo and just giving it a word. He's putting a word to a concept, in other words. And here we see, no, not Gildor in Glorian, who is one of the most mysterious characters because he says he is of the house of Finrod, which is a whole confusing thing. Finrod had no children, and I could get into that, but I shan't because we already talked about it when we read that part. But anyway, here Faramir is sensing what the elves sense. He doesn't know what it's called. He doesn't have the authority to say what it is, but he can feel it. That's what's really crazy. He can feel it. And that's what I mean when I say that Faramir is one of the most perceptive and astute characters. Do you think that Faramir has met many elves? Probably not a whole lot, right? There are some Sindar that would have traveled through Gondor in the days when Faramir was really young, But he doesn't really run into a lot of elves in his line of work as captain of Gondor, later on, he'll know a lot of elves because he becomes the Prince of Ithilien, and Legolas winds up bringing some of the elves from Eren Lasgalen, and some of them live in Ithilien for a time because it's just, such a pretty place, so they enjoy it. But it's just, he hasn't really met a lot of elves, is what I'm saying. So it's not like he's had any elves that taught him how to recognize this sort of thing. However, he is one of the most unique characters because he is one of the only people out there who can, with confidence, if he felt like it, which he wouldn't feel like it, he wouldn't brag, but he could say that his education came from an angel. He is every bit Gandalf's student. And I think that's how we could come to that conclusion that he is able to perceive this sort of thing. Hey, Apple with the watch streak. Oh, look. So Faramir as this character, and Gandalf is going to go into more detail later about, well, in The Return of the King, I should say, about who Faramir really is and what he's all about. But we're seeing this guy, he's the pupil of a wizard, he's the son of a steward, and he has almost elvish perception, and he's just an incredibly wise person, and that's why I said the movies hurt me so much. Like I said, I love the films. I love what Peter Jackson did, but if I could tell him off for 5 minutes about something, hey, rednecks, it would be, dude, you ruined Faramir. I mean, you've ruined Frodo and Gimli too, but you've really ruined Faramir. You really destroyed him. Why? I I would hope that at some point we do get another adaptation of The Lord of the Rings that treats this character with the respect that he's owed, and Gimli as well, and Frodo as well, but especially Faramir, because Faramir was just, it's like that, that line from The Godfather, look at how they massacred my boy. So, like I said, there's a lot, almost every line that Faramir says, there is just this wisdom and this truth and this heart to it. And even now, he's saying, look, if I don't do what's right for Minas Tirith, I'm not worth anything. My life is forfeit. That's the end of me. So I have to figure out what that is. So even though my heart is saying I should let you go, and my mind is saying I should drag you back to Minas Tirith, we're going to go somewhere and have a real conversation and really get to know each other and really figure out what we're all about, and then I'll make a decision. Also, he gets to meet Gollum, so that's a whole other thing, which we're getting to here. So let's continue here. There was nothing for Frodo to do but to fall in with this request or order. It seemed in any case a wise course for the moment, since this foray of men of Gondor had made a journey in Ithilien more dangerous than ever. They set out at once, Mablung and Damrod a little ahead, and Faramir with Frodo and Sam behind. Skirting the hither side of the pool where the hobbits had bathed, they crossed the stream, climbed a long bank, and passed into green-shadowed woodlands that marched ever downwards and westwards. While they walked as swiftly as hobbits could go, they talked in hushed voices. I broke off our speech together, said Faramir, not only because time pressed, as Master Samwise had reminded me, but also because we were drawing near to matters that were better not debated openly before many men. It was for that reason that I turned rather to the matter of my brother and let be Isildur's bane. You are not wholly frank with me, Frodo. I told no lies, and of the truth all I could, said Frodo. I do not blame you, said Faramir. You spoke with skill in a hard place, and wisely, it seemed to me. But I learned or guessed more from you than your words said. You were not friendly with Boromir, or you did not part in friendship. You, and Master Samwise too, I guess, have some grievance. Now I loved him dearly, and would gladly avenge his death, yet I knew him well. Isildur's bane. I would hazard that Isildur's bane lay between you, and was a cause of contention in your company. Clearly, it is a mighty heirloom of some sort, and such things do not breed peace among confederates. Not if aught may be learned from ancient tales. Do I not hit near the mark? Near, said Frodo, but not in the gold. There was no contention in our company, though there was doubt. Doubt which way we should take from the Emyn Muil. But be that as it may, ancient tales teach us also the peril of rash words concerning such things as heirlooms. Ah, then it is as I thought. Your trouble was with Boromir alone. He wished this thing be brought to Minas Tirith. Alas, it is a crooked fate that seals your lips who saw him last, and holds for me that which I long to know. What was in his heart and thought in his latest hours? Whether he erred or no, of this I am sure he died well, achieving some good thing. His face was more beautiful even than in life. But, Frodo, I pressed you hard at first about Isildur's bane. Forgive me. It was unwise in such an hour and place. I had not yet time for thought. We had had a hard fight, and there was more than enough to fill my mind. But even as I spoke with you, I drew nearer to the mark, and so deliberately shot wider, for you must know that much is still preserved of ancient lore among the riders of the city that is not spread abroad. We of my house are not of the line of Elendil, though the blood of Númenor is in us, for we reckon back our line to Mardil, the good steward, who ruled in the king's stead when he went away to war. And that was King Eärnur, last of the line of Anarion, and childless, and he never came back. And the stewards have governed the city since that day, though it was many generations of men ago. So you get a little Gondor history there, and we'll talk about that a lot more when we get to the appendix. And that's a ways off, of course. But, we're just seeing more of what I had been saying about Faramir, just being really good at sussing out the truth. And here, even apologizing for sort of like coming a little hard at Frodo in the way that he spoke to him at first. And he was saying, hey, look, man, I'm sorry. My mind was reeling. I was just in a battle for, life and death against these guys. There was this crazy elephant, and, I might have spoken to you a little harshly, and for that I apologize. So, and he's even saying, hey, I kind of threw in a few things there that might not be entirely true because I didn't really want the men to really guess what was going on. I get it. I could tell you said you were friends with Boromir, but I could just see it in your eyes. You didn't really like the guy. I liked him a lot. He was my brother. I loved him, but I can tell there was something wrong, and I'm not going to make you tell me what happened. It just really sucks that you can't, Yeah, he's just a swell dude. Exactly, Brian. He's just a swell dude. And like I said, when Peter Jackson did his version of Faramir, he wanted to show him becoming that person. He wanted to show him becoming like Aragorn, for example. And even Aragorn, if you remember in the films, he at first he was like, I don't know, I don't want to be the king. I don't deal with all that, And then it was later on when he was like, all right, I'm going to become the king, Now, Brian, you bring up a good point there, actually. If he would have mentioned Gandalf, Frodo might have been a little more... That's a good point. More willing to give details, like, Gandalf. But then again, I mean, keep in mind everything that happened in Book 1, right? Especially when Frodo and Sam first met Aragorn. Because if Faramir had said, well, I'm a friend of Gandalf's, and Frodo would have been like, oh, in that case, I could tell you a little bit more. And then you know what would have happened? Sam would have said, up. We don't know that he's being truthful about that. Is he keeping the entire fellowship secret? No, I don't think he is, because he said he traveled with Boromir. He said he traveled with a man named Aragorn. And he mentioned the others. Some of them were his friends, and some of them were his kin, which is Merry and Pippin, since they are his cousins. I think the reason he hasn't mentioned Gandalf is because, as far as Frodo knows, Gandalf's dead. Keep in mind, Frodo really doesn't know. He knows who Gandalf is. He doesn't know what Gandalf is. He certainly doesn't know that he's returned to the world as Gandalf the White. He's not going to find that out for a long while, actually. So, but I think that, yeah, if he tried to name drop, if Faramir, like you said, tried to name drop Gandalf, I think that would have put Frodo a little off his guard. I think you're right. But I think Sam would have stepped in and said something. Because remember, Sam was the one that was like, well, anybody could say that. How do we really know it's true, And that was something that Aragorn told him, dude, you're right. You're really smart. You know what I mean? The movies made it seem like Frodo and Gandalf's meetings happened between a few days at most. Well, you know what? It's interesting. In a way, he's already met Gandalf, except he didn't know it was Gandalf. But yeah, I mean, like, when you look at the passage of time in the appendix, it really is just a few weeks later that he's going to find out that Gandalf is alive. Oh, but I know what you're referring to. You're referring to the very beginning. That made it seem like it was just a few minutes, like it was maybe a day or two, when he comes back and he said, is it secret? Is it safe? Not that it was 17 years later. You know what I mean? I get what you're referring to. I didn't understand that immediately. But like I said, if we remember back to when they met Aragorn in Bree, and Sam was the one that was like, I don't know, like anybody could have said what he said. How do we know you're really the guy that that Gandalf's talking about in the letter? How do we really know? How do we know you didn't kill the real Strider and take all his stuff, and now you're pretending to be him? And then Frodo had a very good reasoning why he believed him, and which Aragorn was a little bit insulted by, but that's okay. But he even said, Sam, you're really smart. You really get it. You're really the sort of vigilant type that doesn't get fooled easily. Very difficult to fool somebody like Sam. Because, when you think about it, go back to that first scene. We mentioned this earlier. Go back to that very first scene. A bunch of hobbits in a pub gossiping. Sam's there, right? And they're all talking a whole bunch of nonsense about Bilbo and about all these other things. And Sam is sitting there like, he knows what's true and what isn't. I want to do an extended edition marathon. Oh, it's never a bad time, right? You just have it on all day. Go about your day, get some good food to go along with that. We're going to have a really bad snowstorm here this weekend, unfortunately. So I'm how people say they're looking forward to something? The opposite of that. Really not looking forward to the big snowstorm that we're supposed to get. Sam is the most clever character. No, he's not clever. He's not clever is the wrong word. Clever is the wrong word. Even he would tell you he's not clever. He's like Faramir in a way. He's perceptive, and he's slow to trust somebody. But when he does trust somebody, that's like a lifelong bond at that point. Actually, the word for what he is, and we'll go back to what Aragorn said. Aragorn used the perfect word. He is a stout fellow. He is sturdy. He's sturdy. And everybody kind of thinks of him as a little bit dumb. And that's not the case. It's just that he isn't somebody that is expected to have any sort of education. Even his name, Samwise, basically means halfwit. That's how you would translate it. But I'm going to skip ahead to something. Let me grab the Return of the King here real quickly. Let me see. I'm not even sure if my copy has what I'm looking for. I might have to go to the PDF, but let's see if I could find it in the appendix. There's a lot of appendix, unfortunately. And that was probably Laurel. That's the Shire calendar. I'm not sure. Mine's an old copy, so it might not have the exact spot that I'm looking for. Yeah, let me just grab it from my digital copy. Stout fellow. Yeah, he's a stout fellow. He's a sturdy guy. He's dependable, right? And he's not so easily tricked. Let me bring this up. Okay, I found it. Okay, so there's a letter that in the early Fourth Age that King Aragorn sends to the Shire, and I'm going to read it to you in Sindarin, and then I'm going to. It's very short. I'm going to read it to you in Sindarin, and then I'll highlight the part that I want to highlight. Elisar tel canto Aragorn aranthonian eletham arangondor ahir mar annui. Aglen matha e varan duiniant erin dulthun ithwil. Egorban genaldio dranil erin gwirith etwen. Are anira anas sulinand mielen efain edrga de anira tira de shedia per hael. I send you a panfel estatharain. Condir dan emeril besdiana Eleanor meronil glorfinel einel selathdin. Lorhel gelir kodar febarnon iarnath din. Per are meril svildadin aran minos tiris melsharanul in shua. So that's it. That's Sindarin. I know my Sindarin isn't really that great. I if I'm going to speak Elvish, I'm going to speak Quenya. But the part that I want to draw attention to is where he says "per hail." the full thing is Ichurdur Perhel, which is Master Samwise. And then there's a parenthetical where he says Isenuel Panthel Estatharine, where he says that basically Perhel is Sam's name in Sindarin, but he thinks Panhel is a better name for him. So what does that mean, right? And you're like, all right, you're doing all this like weird pseudo Welsh language stuff, right? What is that, right? So Samwise translates as Perhel. Now, Sam in English actually means half. So you half wise, right? Somebody who's half wise. Tolkien, in his letters, he said half-wit. That's what it means. It means half-wit. And if you think, wow, that's sort of mean of his father to name him that, but if his father was really bad at coming up with names, and you'll notice that Sam's brothers and sister, well, his sister doesn't have a bad name because none of the Hobbit women have bad names because they're all named after flowers, but his brothers have really bad names too. His father was just terrible at coming up with names. But what he's saying is Perhel, half wise. And he's saying a better name would be Panhel, full wise. So he's basically telling Sam that, hey, you might be named half wise, but I think you're all the way wise. You know, so I could tell you that nobody in the book respects Sam more than Aragorn, I would think. I think that he gets more respect from Aragorn than he gets from any other character, which is pretty neat when you think about, you know, the fact that that's the king. You know, the king has respects him, right? A big compliment. Exactly, Brian. A big compliment. I'm not saying that other characters disrespect him, because that's certainly not the case. I mean, the man wound up being elected to mayor of the Shire. The actual title is Mayor of Meikle Delving, but Meikle Delving is the capital of the Shire, and the term of office is 7 years, and he gets elected 7 times. So he gets 49 years as the mayor of the Shire, you know, who doesn't actually rule. It's a ceremonial role. He's in charge of a few things, mostly the post office and where new buildings get to be put up and where new buildings can't be put up. It's sort of he's sort of a postmaster and parks and recreations and that sort of thing. You know, the real ruler of the Shire would be Pippin, but you know, because this is an elected office here. But the fact that they elected him 7 times in a row shows that, yes, he is a well-regarded person, you know. Alice has an idea. I want to hear about this idea as I continue along here. Let's see. And actually, who was it? Brian, I think, said this. Let me scroll up here on the YouTube chat. Brian, you mentioned that, you know, Faramir should just name drop Gandalf. Brisket confit. You know, they did something a bit like, not exactly, but a bit like that at Perkins at one point. It had brisket and this sort of like pepper relish. It was really good. I think you're onto something. I think you might do something better. Gardening is held in high regard. Yeah. Well, you know, because what's his last name? Gamgee, right? With the next generation of Gamgees, they actually changed their last name to Gardner. So you're not wrong, Kevin. You're not wrong. Gardening does wind up being in very high regard, especially in a place like the Shire. You know, the Shire, what does that mean? The Shire. It means the countryside, right? Stupid question. Is Pippin kind of a royalty? It's not a stupid question at all. Pippin is what we would refer to as nobility. So basically, the Shire is technically within the boundaries of Elendil's reign. So the king of the Shire is Aragorn, or will be Aragorn. However, of course, Elendil's realm got split into 2 parts. There is the southern part, which is Gondor, and the northern part, which is called Arnor. And then Arnor actually wound up being split into 3 different kingdoms. There was Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar. And Arthedain was the kingdom that the Shire was a part of. And the Shire was founded by a bunch of hobbits from Bree. who found this land, this beautiful countryside. They called it the Suzat, which is Westron. It means the Shire or the countryside. And they said, this is where we want to live. So they went to, and they petitioned the king of Arthedain and said, can we settle this land? And he said, yes, sure. All I ask of you, you know what? You could govern it yourselves, actually. All I ask is that you upkeep the roads in and out of there, and you could govern it as you see fit, you know. And then eventually the king died, and he didn't have any heirs, so there was no longer a king. Bilbo talks a little bit about that in The Hobbit, how there really isn't a king in that region anymore. And so there was no king. Instead, there was like the chieftains of the Dunedain, and then, you know. So what the Shire did is they said, well, we've got to have somebody in charge. So they appointed a Thane. And a Thane is essentially like the king in absentia, or a steward, in other words. So the Thaneship, you know, it's dynastic, like a king is. But eventually, one of the Thanes wound up moving out of the Shire, and he went to Buckland, where he became the first master of Buckland. And he was the only hobbit to ever have both titles, by the way. And then one of the old Tooks, I don't remember, I think it might have been like Isengrim Took the First, something like that. He became the Thane, and that's why Pippin is in this line of nobility. So right now the Thane of the Shire is Paladin Took, and then Pippin is going to become the Thane when his father either dies or decides to give it up and pass it on to his son. So they kept all the same laws because they really liked the king's law. They really liked Arthedain. So they said, we're just going to keep it all the same. And when Aragorn becomes the king, he's, like I said, he's technically the king of the Shire, but he says, you know what, you guys, you got it handled, and I have such a big kingdom to worry about. So not only am I going to let you continue to do your thing and govern yourselves as you see fit, you know what, I'm going to make the Shire a little bit bigger. You know, that land, Buckland, that's part of the Shire now. Westmarch, there's nobody there, but you guys can expand into it. So we're going to make it a lot larger. So essentially, the government of the Shire is very similar to the government of England, where there's the sort of dynastic monarchy in the Thaneship. But there's also like an elected parliamentary process, which we see in the Master of Buckland, the Warden of Westmarch, and the Mayor of Michel Delving. So that's how, you know, like Merry is also nobility. Sam becomes an elected official, and the first warden of Westmarch is actually one of Sam's son-in-laws. So not a stupid question at all. A good question. He's technically nobility. He's not really royalty. He's more like Faramir, actually. Pippin is like Faramir because his father is essentially a steward. And fun fact, Pippin, he winds up marrying a girl named Diamond, who was from a town called Longcleave in the North Farthing. And they have one kid, a son, and they name him Faramir. So, like I said, Pippin and Faramir, very similar characters, actually. All right, let's continue now. You guys got good questions today, I think. I don't think that a question is stupid. I'll tell you if it's stupid. That wasn't a stupid question. All right, but yeah, somebody mentioned, why doesn't Faramir just name drop Gandalf? We're getting to that, actually. We're going to get to the part where we talk about Gandalf. Okay. And this I remember of Boromir as a boy, when we together learned the tale of our sires and the history of our city, that it always displeased him that his father was not king. How many hundreds of years need it be to make a steward a king, if the king returns not? He asked. Few years may be in other places of less royalty, my father answered. In Gondor, 10,000 years would not suffice. Alas, poor Boromir. Does that not tell you something of him? It does, said Frodo. Yet always he treated Aragorn with honor. I doubt it not, said Faramir. If he was satisfied of Aragorn's claim, as you say, he would greatly reverence him. But the pinch had not yet come. They had not yet reached Minas Tirith or become rivals in her wars. But I stray. We in the house of Denethor know much ancient lore by long tradition, and there are moreover in our treasuries many things preserved, books and tablets writ on withered parchments, yea, and on stone, and on leaves of silver and of gold, in divers characters. None can now read, and for the rest few ever unlock them. I could read little in them, for I have had teaching. It was these records that brought the Grey Pilgrim to us. I first saw him when I was a child, and he has been twice or thrice since then. Now, obviously, the Grey Pilgrim is Gandalf, and we're going to talk about that. As a matter of fact, Grey Pilgrim is the translation of his elvish name, Mithrandir. Myth is grey. Randir is one who goes on a journey with a great purpose, or a pilgrim. That's not what I wanted to talk about here. I just wanted to say that if you notice, Faramir has a very interesting speech pattern that you don't see in Denethor, you don't see in Boromir, you don't really see in very many of the characters at all. He occasionally lapses into Middle English. And since you have to think, well, he's not actually speaking English, right? He's speaking Westron, and Tolkien translated it to English in the text. So what we're seeing here is that he's probably letting a little Adunaic slip into his speech pattern, and that Tolkien interprets the occasional lapses from Westron to Adunaic as lapses of English into Middle English, At least that's my estimation. Old English would be, that would be the language in Rohan. We talked about that a lot already. But we saw it where he threw out a few thous when he spoke of his brother. And here, his sentence structure becomes very Middle English. And to point out specifically what I mean, when he says, if he were satisfied of Aragorn's claim, as you say, he would greatly reverence him. The modern English would be, he would have revered him greatly, or he would have had great reverence of him, or he would have been in awe of him, or something like that, right? But he would greatly reverence him is very sort of, well, it's really early modern English. But where it becomes sort of late Middle English, or maybe that late period Adunaic, is where he says, where is it now? Here we are. Books and tablets writ on withered parchments, yea, and on stone, and on leaves of silver and gold in divers characters. Now, if you were to look at the word, and if you guys have a copy of The Two Towers, it's page 278. The paragraph at the very bottom there. If you were to look at this word, it says divers, right? That's what you would think. Divers, characters? What is he saying? Divers? Who's diving? Right? D-I-V-E-R-S. It's when you have the understanding of the linguistics, you realize he's saying diverse, but Middle English did not have that trailing E ever. That was not a thing. So it was divers without the E at the end. So it looks like it says divers. And I'm just saying that this sort of like, it's like I said, Faramir is like one of the most interesting characters in the whole book. Even the way that he talks is unique. You don't hear anybody else lapse like that and sort of use several different dialects in what is just a casual conversation. You know what I mean? And he's speaking quietly. Him and Frodo were sort of just having like a hushed little speech here between as they're walking towards, where Faramir's hideout is. So let's continue here. The Grey Pilgrim, said Frodo. Had he a name? No, all right, I have to pause again. Let me stop again. I'm sorry. If Bilbo heard him say that, I just have to say, if Bilbo heard him say that, it would have been that meme. It would have been, boy, like if Bilbo heard him say did this Grey Pilgrim had a name? This is sort of like when in book 2, when Frodo was first in Rivendell, and he was talking to Bilbo, and Bilbo kept mentioning his friend the Dunedain, and then he says, "Oh, here he is! Here comes the Dunedain now!" And it's Aragorn, right? And Frodo says to him, "Well, you got a lot of names. You're Frodo. You're Strider. You're Aragorn. You're the Dunedain, or you're Dunedain." And Bilbo says, "The Dunedain, Dunedain, man of the West, Númenorian. I thought I taught you Elvish. Why didn't you pick that up?" Now, for him to say, and Kevin, thank you for joining as a member. Thank you very much. I know this is usually a Twitch conceit, but if we can get people to put a few emotes into the chat as a little sort of celebration, whatever emotes you think is best, that would be fun. Here, I'll put some Silmarils and some rings and a couple of Eyes of Sauron in there. Thank you for joining, Kevin. Thank you very much. Your support means a lot. Okay. All right. So, like I said, if Bilbo were here in this scene, he would have said, "Grey Pilgrim, Mithrandir, he's talking about Gandalf. What's wrong with you, kid?" It would have been funny, I think. But yeah. "The Grey Pilgrim," said Frodo. "Had he a name?" "Mithrandir, we called him in elf fashion," said Faramir, "and he was content. Many are my names in many countries," he said. "Mithrandir among the elves, Tharcún to the dwarves, Oloran I was in my youth in the west that is forgotten, in the south Icanus, in the north Gandalf, in the east I go not." "Gandalf," said Frodo. "I thought it was he, Gandalf the Grey, dearest of counsellors, leader of our company. He was lost in Moria." "Mithrandir was lost," said Faramir. "An evil fate seems to have pursued your fellowship. It is hard indeed to believe that one of so great wisdom and of power, for many wonderful things did he among us, could perish, and so much lore be taken from the world. Are you sure of this, and that he did not just leave you and depart where he would?" "Alas, yes," said Frodo. "I saw him fall into the abyss." "I see that there is some great tale of dread in this," said Faramir, "which perhaps you may tell me in the evening time. This Mithrandir was, I now guess, more than a lore master, a great mover of the deeds that are done in our time. Had he been among us to consult concerning the hard words of our dream, he could have made them clearer to us without the need of messenger. Yet maybe he would not have done so when the journey of Boromir was doomed. Mithrandir never spoke to us of what was to be, nor did he reveal his purposes. He got leave of Denethor, how I do not know, to look at the secrets of our treasury, and I learned a little of him, when he would teach, and that was seldom. Ever he would search, and would question us above all else concerning the great battle that was fought upon Dagorlad in the beginning of Gondor, when he who we do not name was overthrown. And he was eager for stories of Isildur, though of him we had less to tell, for nothing certain was ever known among us of his end. Now, before I continue, I just want to go back to all these different names. What do they mean, right? Gandalf has a lot of names. Of course, we know Gandalf, right? What does Gandalf mean? Gand is Norse, and it means a wand. And then we have Alf, which is essentially elf. Now, when we say elf in the Norse sense, we're not talking about Tolkien's elves. We're talking about spirits, right? So basically, a lot of people like to translate Gandalf as elf with a cane or wand elf. It's really spirit with a wand, which is exactly what he is. Mithrandir, I already went over. That's Grey Pilgrim. Tharcún is what the dwarves call him, and that's a fun one. It essentially just means old guy. Oloran is his real name. And out of all of the 5 wizards, they all had real names. And at certain points, Tolkien would change his mind on what their real names were. That's how Curamo, which was Saruman's real name, eventually became Tarandor. Radagast's real name, we would know it in Unfinished Tales. They tell you his name is Eowendil, but then later he changed that to Hravendil. But anyway, Olorin didn't change. He never changed that one, probably because it was pretty set in stone in The Lord of the Rings, but also because it's just a fascinating name. It doesn't have an exact translation. We have to be a little creative, and we have to understand the Quenya language and how it works. But Olor is related to Olos, which is dreams. So I deem that his name means dreamer, or one who dreams. Incanus is the name in the south. Now, people have wondered, when he says the south, does he mean Harad? Some Tolkien scholars think so. Some people think, well, that's what he was called in Gondor, actually, right? But I don't think so, because we know that they called him Mithrandir, so I don't go for that. I think that was a Haradrim name. Incanus is spy from the north. And of course it says in the east I go not. He doesn't have an Easterling sort of name. Let's continue here. I wanted to go back to the names. Now Faramir's voice sank to a whisper. But this much I learned, Orgas, and I have kept it ever a secret in my heart since, that Isildur took somewhat from the hand of the unnamed, ere he went away from Gondor, never to be seen among mortal men again. Here, I thought, was the answer to Mithrandir's questioning, but it seemed then a matter that concerned only the seekers after ancient learning. Nor, when the riddling words of our dream were debated among us, did I think of Isildur's bane as being the same thing. For Isildur was ambushed and slain by orc arrows according to the only legend that we knew, and Mithrandir had never told me more. What in truth this thing is I cannot yet guess, but some heirloom of power and peril it must be, a fell weapon perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. If it were a thing that gave advantage in battle, I can well believe that Boromir, the proud and fearless, often rash, ever anxious for the victory of Minas Tirith and his own glory therein, might desire such a thing and be allured by it. Alas, that ever he went on that errand. I should have been chosen by my father and the elders, but he put himself forward as being the older and the hardier, both true, and he would not be stayed. But fear no more, I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not where Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her, so, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo. Neither did the council, said Frodo. Nor do I. I would have nothing to do with such matters. All right, let's talk about this. That's a big, big paragraph right there. Like I said, Faramir is so incredibly smart, so incredibly perceptive. He's putting things together that even Gandalf struggled with at times, right? He is putting together that this Isildur's bane must have been whatever Isildur took from the Dark Lord and that it led to his doom, and that it must be something pretty powerful. And that Boromir, who always sought out power for good, not for evil, because he was a good man, would have wanted it. He would have said anything for my country. And Faramir is not like that. He's saying, even if my country was being destroyed and I was the only one that could save it, but I had to use something evil to do so, I wouldn't do it. Elrond kept this a secret then? Well, it's not like he's ever met Elrond. He will meet Elrond, but you have to understand that Elrond's in the north, and if you remember the scene where we talked about the dream that he keeps alluding to, there were three elements that Faramir did not understand, nor did Boromir. One was Imladris, one was Isildur's bane, and one was Halfling. And they went to their father, Denethor, because that's the smartest guy they know. And Denethor is really, really smart. And he says, I have no idea what Isildur's bane is. I have no idea what a halfling is. But Imladris, I know that. That's an elvish country in the north. That's called Rivendell. So Denethor knew about Elrond, but Elrond has not traveled to this part of the country for a really long time. As a matter of fact, I don't get the feeling that Elrond travels. I think he stays where he is. We hear of his wife traveling, we hear of his daughter traveling, we hear of his sons traveling, but we never hear about him traveling until he leaves Middle-earth. I think that once he put down roots in Rivendell, he stayed there, and the reason he stayed there was probably because he had a ring of power. the story of Isildur, though, does come from Elrond, because and we're going to get to this eventually, because it's not in the Lord of the Rings. It's in this other book that I have here. This is Unfinished Tales, and we're eventually going to read a story in there called the Disaster of the Gladden Fields, and that's the story of Isildur's death. And at the end of it, there's a rationale for how this story could come to be known in the wide world, and it basically is, well, there was one guy who escaped and was able to tell most of it, but as for what happened in Isildur's actual final moments, it's a lot of conjecture that Elrond came up with. So, Elrond would be telling this story, and I think there was, at some point in the past, a lot of knowledge sharing between Elrond and the kings of Gondor. And Denethor is described as this very scholarly fellow who likes to read a lot. So he probably knew the story and taught it to his sons. And that was probably a tradition to talk about. That's the legend that we have. And Faramir even calls it the only legend that we have of Isildur, is how he died. Now, notice that not all of it is there. We don't know that Isildur cut the ring, or let's say Faramir doesn't know that he cut the ring from the Dark Lord's fingers. Elrond knows this because Elrond was there. And if you think about who else was there, Elrond was there, Círdan was there, and that's about it, right? Isildur himself, right? And nobody else was that close by. Gil-galad was there. He was in the process of dying, so he wasn't going to last much longer. So it was really just Círdan and Elrond who know this. And the thing is, they think these rings, they shouldn't be something that people should know about, because who knows that Círdan had one of the rings? Gandalf. And who knows that Gandalf has one of the rings? Círdan. Right? We know that Saruman figured it out, and that's just because Saruman's just that smart. But, yeah. The actual Isildur's Bane thing, nobody's really puzzled that out. Elrond knows what it is. Elrond would keep that a secret, and he would be absolutely right to keep that a secret, because if the people of the world knew that Isildur kept the Ring of Power, they would probably start to criticize him, and they would think poorly of him. They wouldn't necessarily understand why he kept it, and they couldn't understand why he kept it. You know who could understand? Gollum would understand. Bilbo would understand. Frodo would understand. Unless you've held one of these things in your hand, you really don't sort of get the allure of it. Even Faramir is really close to the truth. He's really, really close to the truth. He's saying, if I saw this thing, whatever it is, he doesn't know it's a ring. If I saw this thing lying on the side of the road and I knew with 100% certainty that I could use it to defeat Sauron, I wouldn't do it, because it's evil. What he doesn't know is all of the torture that Boromir went through, because Boromir didn't go into this whole thing wanting to take the ring. That was a madness that came sort of at the last moment, because Frodo was making the decision to go off on his own. And the ring doesn't want to be with Frodo. He doesn't want to be destroyed. So it's thinking, out of all these people, the guy with the shield, I could probably mess with him the best, The wizard's too smart. The dwarf, that's not going to work, right? The elf's never going to touch me. I'm tired of being held by hobbits. That Aragorn guy, he's a bit too much for me, like the guy with the shield, Boromir was sort of like the spiritual weak link in the Fellowship. Not to say he was weak, but he was the weakest of those characters, All right, let's continue. Like I said, good questions today. Good questions. For myself, said Faramir, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the king, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens, not a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even a kind mistress, of willing slaves. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man old and wise. Okay, that's funny. I just want to share it with the YouTube side of it. We just had a new person come in named Dumarkist, which is a fantastic name, by the way, said that I'm dwarf-pilled because they have soft bellies and big woolly beards and that this is a good choice. You're right. You're right. I mean, let me tell you something. When I was young and I was reading this, I was only 11 years old when I was reading this. You know who my favorite character was? It was Gimli. I'm not even joking. Now I'm more of a Sam fan. Sam's my favorite. Faramir's up there too, and Gandalf, of course. But back then, when I was like, I think Gimli's the coolest guy. Thank you for coming in. Welcome to the chat. You got me there. I'm like dwarf pilled. Oh no, is this going to be some horrible political thing? But no, I get what you're saying. You're being funny. All right, let me talk about one thing that he mentioned here. Well, really, the whole paragraph there, he's saying that, he doesn't love swords for their sharpness or arrows for their swiftness. He doesn't love war, but he knows that it's sometimes necessary to defend what is good. And this is the closest that Tolkien ever gets to doing the Rod Serling thing. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, Rod Serling, he was a war veteran just like Tolkien, and he had a TV show in the 50s called The Twilight Zone, and he would give you parables and allegories and all sorts of other things, and then he would explain it. Now, Tolkien did not believe in allegory. He did not like it as a literary device. But as his son pointed out, you can often see his thoughts in there, as you can see the thoughts of any author in their work. And Tolkien's thoughts on war, right here, what Faramir said. It's not good. Sometimes we need to do it, but it's not good. So let's continue here. So fear me not. I do not ask you to tell me more. I do not even ask you to tell me whether I now speak nearer the mark. But if you will trust me, it may be that I can advise you in your present quest, whatever that be, yes, and even aid you. Frodo made no answer. Almost he yielded to the desire for help and counsel to tell this grave young man whose words seemed so wise and fair that all was in his mind. But something held him back. His heart was heavy with fear and sorrow. If he and Sam were indeed, as seemed likely, all that was now left of the 9 walkers, then he was in sole command of the secret of their errand. Better mistrust undeserved than rash words, and the memory of Boromir, of the dreadful change that the lure of the ring had worked in him, was very present to his mind when he looked at Faramir and listened to his voice. Unlike they were, and yet also much akin. Now, that's sort of, not really metaphor, but that's sort of like descriptor there, right? Like and not alike. Tolkien uses this a lot. He's saying when Faramir speaks, he looks like Boromir, he sounds like Boromir, he's a lot like Boromir, but not like him. Different, We saw it in the previous section when Gimli, we're going back to Gimli, when he said that he wanted to be present at the confrontation between Gandalf and Saruman. And he confessed that it was mostly just curiosity. He wanted to see if Saruman really does look just like Gandalf. And when he sees Saruman for the first time, he just sort of mutters to himself. He says, like and not alike. And yes, from a distance, it's just 2 old men with white hair, right? They look very similar, but not the same in their eyes, not the same in their demeanor and the way that they speak. So that's something that Tolkien brings up a lot, like and unalike. They walked on in silence for a while, passing like gray and green shadows under the old trees, their feet making no sound. Above them many birds sang, and the sun glistened on the polished roof of dark leaves in the evergreen woods of Ithilien. Sam had taken no part in the conversation, though he had listened, and at the same time he had attended with his keen hobbit ears to all the soft woodland noises about them. One thing he had noted, that in all the talk the name of Gollum had not once come up. He was glad, though he felt that it was too much to hope for that he would never hear it again. He soon became aware that, though they walked alone, there were many men close at hand. Not only Damrod and Mablung flitting in and about the shadows ahead, but others on either side, all making their swift, secret way to some appointed place. Once, looking suddenly back, as if by some prickle of the skin told him that he was watched from behind, he thought he caught a brief glimpse of a small, dark shape slipping behind a tree trunk. He opened his mouth to speak and shut it again. "I'm not sure of it," he said to himself. "And why should I remind them of the old villain if they choose to forget him? I wish I could." So they passed on until the woodlands grew thinner, and the land began to fall more steeply. Then they turned aside again to the right, and came quickly to a small river in a narrow gorge. It was the same stream that trickled far above out of the round pool, now grown to a swift torrent, leaping down over many stones in a deep cloven bed, overhung with ilex and dark boxwoods. Looking west, they could see, below them in a haze of light, lowlands and broad meads, and glinting far off in the westering sun the wide waters of the Anduin. "Here, alas, I must do you a discourtesy," said Faramir. "I hope you will pardon it to one who has made so far as orders give way to courtesy, as not to slay you or bind you. But it is a command that no stranger, not even one of Rohan that fights with us, shall see the path that we now go with open eyes. I must blindfold you." "As you will," said Frodo. "Even the elves do likewise indeed, and blindfolded we cross the borders of fair Lothlorien. Gimli the dwarf took it ill, but the hobbits endured it. It is to Well, Gimli had a good reason, because he was singled out, actually. It was Aragorn's idea that they all be blindfolded, right? Because initially that was Haldir's thought, that you guys can come in, but we got to blindfold the dwarf. And Gimli's like, "No, you're not doing that. Not unless you also blindfold Legolas." And then Legolas is like, "Whoa, hey, what are you bringing me into this for?" And then Aragorn had to be the adult and say, "Hey, how about we all wear the blindfolds?" "It is to no place so fair that I shall lead you," said Faramir, "but I am glad that you will take this willingly and not by force." He called softly, and immediately Mablung and Damrod stepped out of the trees and came back to him. "Blindfold these guests," said Faramir, "securely, but not as if to discomfort them. Do not tie their hands. They will give their word not to try to see. I trust them to shut their eyes of their own accord, but eyes will blink if the feet stumble. Lead them so they do not falter." With green scarves the two guards now bound up the hobbits' eyes, and drew their hoods down almost to their mouths. Then quickly they took each by the hand and went on their way. All that Frodo and Sam knew of this last mile of the road they learned from guessing in the dark. After a little they found that they were on a path descending steeply. Soon it grew so narrow that they went in single file, brushing a stony wall on either side. Their guards steered them from behind with their hands laid firmly on their shoulders. Now and again they came to rough places and were lifted from their feet for a while and then set down again. Always the noise of running water was on their right hand, and it grew nearer and louder. At length they were halted. Quickly Mablung and Damrod turned them around several times, and they lost all sense of direction. Then they climbed upwards a little. It seemed cold, and the noise of the stream had become faint. Then they were picked up and carried down many steps and round a corner. Suddenly they heard the water again, loud now, rushing and splashing, all round them it seems. Then they felt a fine rain on their hands and cheeks. At last they were set on their feet once more. For a moment they stood so, half fearful, blindfolded, not knowing where they were, and no one spoke. Yeah, kids. We'll all wear the blindfold, exactly. Then came the voice of Faramir close behind. "Let them see," he said. The scarves were removed and their hoods drawn back, and they blinked and gasped. They stood on a wet floor of polished stone, the doorstep, as it were, of a rough-hewn gate of rock opening dark before them. But in front a thin veil of water was hung, so near that Frodo could have put an outstretched arm into it. It faced westward. The level shafts in the setting sun behind it beat upon it, and the red light was broken into many flickering beams of ever-changing color. It was as if they stood at the window of some high elven tower, curtained with threaded jewels of silver and gold and ruby, sapphire, and amethyst, all kindled with an unconsuming fire. I'm just looking at the time here, and it's starting to look likely that we're only going to be able to do the one chapter today, which is fine. We have done a few streams, actually, where we only got through one chapter. It was certainly that way for the Council of Elrond, and Flight to the Ford was a really big one that we had to stop a lot to talk about lore. At least by good chance we came at the right hour to reward you for your patience, said Faramir. This is the window of the sunset, Henneth Annun, fairest of all the falls of Ithilien, land of many fountains. Few strangers have ever seen it, but there is no kingly hall behind to match it. Enter now and see. Even as he spoke, the sun sank, and the fire faded in the flowing water. They turned and passed under low, forbidding arch. At once they found themselves in a rock chamber, wide and rough, with an uneven, stooping roof. A few torches were kindled and cast a dim light on the glistening walls. Many men were already there. Others were still coming in by twos and threes through a dark, narrow door on one side. As their eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, the hobbits saw that the cave was larger than they had guessed, and was filled with a great store of arms and victuals. Well, here is our refuge, said Faramir. Not a place of great ease, but here you may pass the night in peace. It is dry at least, and there is food, though no fire. At one time the water flowed down through this cave and out of the arch, but its course was changed further up the gorge by workmen of old, and the stream sent down in a fall of doubled height over the rocks far above. All the ways into this grot were then sealed against the entry of water or aught else, all save one. There are now but two ways out, that passage yonder by which you entered blindfolded, and through the window curtain to a deep bowl filled with knives of stone. Now rest a while until the evening meal is set. The hobbits were taken to a corner and given a low bed to lie on if they wished. Meanwhile men busied themselves about the cave, quietly and in orderly quickness. Light tables were taken in from the walls and set up on trestles and laden with gear. This was plain and unadorned for the most part, but all well and fairly made. Round platters, bowls, and dishes of glazed brown clay or turned boxwood, smooth and clean. Here and there was a cup or basin of polished bronze, and a goblet of plain silver was set by the captain's seat in the middle of the inmost table. Faramir went about among his men, questioning each as he came in a soft voice. Some came back from the pursuit of the Southrons, others, left behind as scouts near the road, came in latest. All the Southrons had been accounted for, save only the great Mumak. What happened to him, none could say. Of the enemy no movement could be seen, not even an orc spy was abroad. You saw and heard nothing, Anborn? Faramir asked of the latest comer. Well, no, lord, said the man, not orc at least, but I saw, or thought I saw, something a little strange. It was getting deep dusk when the eyes made things greater than they should be, so perhaps it may have been no more than a squirrel. Sam pricked up his ears at this. Yet if so, it was a black squirrel, and I saw no tail. 'Twas like the shadow on the ground, and it whisked behind a tree trunk when I drew nigh and went up aloft as swift as any squirrel could. You will not have us slay wild beasts for no purpose, and it seemed no more, so I tried no arrow. It was too dark for sure shooting anyway, and the creature was gone into the gloom of the leaves in a twinkling. But I stayed for a while, for it seemed strange, and then I hastened back. I thought I heard the thing hiss at me from on high above as I turned away. A large squirrel, maybe. Perhaps, under the shadow of the unnamed, some of the beasts of Mirkwood are wandering hither to our own woods. They have black squirrels there, 'tis said. That is true, they do have black squirrels in Mirkwood, and in The Hobbit, they shot one and tried to eat it, and they found that it was so disgusting that they could not eat the meat of the black squirrel. They also have black squirrels up in Canada, so it's not even like some sort of fantastical creature. They do exist. Perhaps, said Faramir. But then that would be an ill omen, if it was so. We do not want the escapes of Mirkwood and Ithilien. Sam fancied that he gave a swift glance toward the hobbits as he spoke, but Sam said nothing. For a while he and Frodo lay back and watched in the torchlight, and the men moving to and fro, speaking in hushed voices. Then suddenly Frodo fell asleep. Sam struggled with himself, arguing this way and that. He may be all right, he thought, and then he may not. Fair speech may hide a foul heart. He yawned. I could sleep for a week, and I'd be better for it. And what can I do if I keep awake? Me all alone and all these great men about. Nothing, Sam Gamgee. But you've got to keep awake all the same. And somehow he managed it. The light faded from the cave door, and the grey veil of falling water grew dim and was lost in gathering shadow. Always the sound of water went on, never changing its note morning or evening or night. It murmured and whispered of sleep. Sam stuck his knuckles into his eyes. You missed the part about the black squirrel? Yeah, I thought that was fun. That he mentions they do have black squirrels in Mirkwood, which is a bit of a Hobbit callback. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can find that exact passage. Actually, it's not shouldn't be too hard to find. Here's the Hobbit. Let's see. Okay, barrels out of bond. That's too far. Flies and spiders. That's more like it. It's a pretty long chapter, but I seem to remember before they found the elves, there was a portion where they shot a black squirrel. Okay, it's before the water, that's for sure. Before Bombur fell into the water. Let's see. Here it is. I found it. The food would not last forever. It was, in fact, already beginning to get low. They tried shooting at the squirrels, and they wasted many arrows before they managed to bring one down on the path. But when they roasted it proved horrible to taste, and they shot no more squirrels. It was a bit earlier than that they explained that they were black squirrels, which are really a thing. Like I said, I know that they have black squirrels in Canada at the very least. The ones that we have around here, where I am, are more, gray and brown, And we also have chipmunks and mice and all sorts of other creatures in the woods here. I do live in a forest, so. And there's people looking at me right now. We can tell. Who do you think is a better leader, Faramir or Theoden? Oh, man. That's a tough one, actually. I think they're both really good leaders. I think they're both great. If I had to say, gun to my head, I would say Faramir as Prince of Ithilien. But that's, like I said, Theoden was a great king, too. There's, I think that Faramir would not have been put in that position where anybody could just convince him that he's too old and senile to do anything. Faramir lived to be 120 somewhat years old, He made a tactical error. No, he was taken advantage of, is what it really comes down to. He was feeling his age, and then, Saruman's words, coming through Wormtongue, but still Saruman's words, basically just validated all his fears and insecurities. I wouldn't say that he made a tactical error. I would just say that, he let somebody else get the better of him. But he came out of it. Gandalf told him, you'd remember your strength if you held your sword. And that worked out pretty well. All right, let's continue here. Now more torches were being lit. A cask of wine was broached. Storage barrels were being opened. Men were fetching water from the fall. Some were laving their hands in basins. A wide copper bowl and a white cloth were brought to Faramir as he wished. You're biased because of Bernard Hill's acting. Well, the movies treated Theoden a lot better than they treated Faramir. But going just by the book, I would say Faramir would be the better leader. But not by a lot, Wake our guests, he said, and take them water. It is time to eat. Frodo sat up and yawned and stretched. Sam, not used to being waited on, looked with some surprise at the tall man who bowed, holding a basin of water before him. Put it on the ground, master, if you please, he said. Easier for me and you. Then, to the astonishment and amusement of the men, he plunged his head into the cold water and splashed his neck and ears. Is it the custom in your land to wash the head before supper? Said the man who waited on the hobbits. No, before breakfast, said Sam. But if you're short of sleep, cold water on the neck's like rain on a wilted lettuce. There, now I can keep awake long enough to eat a bit. They were then led to seats beside Faramir, barrels covered with pelts and high enough above the benches of the men for their convenience. Before they ate, Faramir and all his men turned and faced west in a moment of silence. Faramir signed to Frodo and Sam that they should do likewise. "So we always do," he said, as they sat down. "We look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and will ever be. Have you no such custom at meat?" "No," said Frodo, feeling strangely rustic and untutored. "But if we are guests, we bow to a host, and after we've eaten we rise and thank him." "We do that also," said Faramir. So I like this because Faramir is discovering, hey, there's other cultures that don't do the same thing. And it's interesting, why would they look towards Numenor? They're hobbits, right? But also, it's they're going into what they have in common too. Oh yeah, we do that too. Now, it's really interesting because Tolkien kept religion out of the Lord of the Rings. He put it in his other works, and when I mean religion, I don't mean the religious themes that go through the book, because that's there front and center. I'm talking about there being religions in Middle-earth, and he said he was very careful to keep churches and cults out of the story because it wasn't a story about churches and cults. If you want to learn about sort of the religions of Middle-earth, or at least the religions of Numenor, Unfinished Tales has that in spades. This is the closest he comes, where they basically just sort of have a silent prayer. They look toward Numenor that was, Elvenhome that is. It's of course talking about Eldamar, and then what lies beyond being Valinor. Hey Matt, how's it going? "O brother, my treasure, O captain, my blood, dreams that we shared bound our fate. But that would our steps be reversed, in your place I'd have been, through briar and bog, Imladris, and then reflected in starlight on still Anduin." Did you come up with that, Chewie? That's obviously what you're doing is sort of like Faramir speaking to Boromir, but it's not a line from The Lord of the Rings. Did you come up with that? Because it's very good. "After so long journeying and camping, and days spent in the lonely wild, the evening meal seemed a feast to the hobbits, to drink pale and yellow wine, cool and fragrant, and eat bread and butter and salted meats and dried fruits, and good red cheese with clean hands and clean knives and plates. Neither Frodo nor Sam refused anything that was offered, nor a second, nor indeed a third helping. The wine coursed in their veins and tired limbs, and they felt glad and easy of heart as they had not done since they had left the land of Lorien. When all was done, Faramir led them to a recess at the back of the cave, partly screened by curtains, and a chair and 2 stools were brought there. A little earthenware lamp burned in a niche. "You may soon desire to sleep," he said, and especially good Samwise, who would not close his eyes before he ate. "Whether for fear of blunting the edge of a noble hunger, or for fear of me, I do not know. But it is not good to sleep too soon after meat, and that following a fast. Let us talk a while." Oh, it's very good, Chewie. It's good. Well, Brian, here's the thing. Of course he should have gone. Logically, we could say he should have gone, right? But, and even Denethor said it should have been Faramir that went, not Boromir. But what does Faramir say? What has Faramir already said? Boromir insisted, and when Boromir insists, nobody could really change his mind. He was a stubborn guy. Aside from that, the story would have been completely different. You know what I mean? If it all came to the same, you would be removing Faramir from this part of the story, and this part of the story is where he really matters, But yeah, because he would have been, either dead or with Aragorn at this point. Let's see, where did I leave off? Here we go. "Let us talk a while. On your journey from Rivendell there must have been many things to tell, and you too would perhaps wish to learn something of us, and the lands where you are now. Tell me of Boromir my brother, and of old Mithrandir, and all the fair people of Lothlorien." Frodo no longer felt sleepy and was willing to talk, but though the food and wine had put him at ease, he had not lost all his caution. Sam was beaming and humming to himself, but when Frodo spoke, he was at first content to listen, only occasionally venturing to make an exclamation of agreement. Frodo told many tales, yet always he steered the matter away from the quest of the company and from the ring, enlarging rather on the valiant part Boromir had played in all their adventures, with the wolves in the wilds, in the snows under Carathras, and in the mines of Moria where Gandalf fell. Faramir was most moved by the story of the fight on the bridge. And by the way, I like to point this out because a lot of people miss this in The Lord of the Rings. Boromir's horn stopped the Balrog in its tracks, only for a moment, but that's still just an amazing thing. And I'm sure that Frodo would have told Faramir that, hey, this Balrog came at us, and Boromir jumped in and he blew the horn, and the thing stopped for a moment. It's a very impressive story. It must have irked Boromir to run from orcs, he said, or even from that fell thing you named, the Balrog, even though he was the last to leave. He was the last, said Frodo, but Aragorn was forced to lead us. He alone knew the way after Gandalf's fall. But had there not been us lesser folk to care for, I do not think that either he or Boromir would have fled. Maybe it would have been better had Boromir fallen there, with Mithrandir, said Faramir, and not gone on to that fate that waited him above the falls of Rauros. Maybe, but tell me now of your own fortunes, said Frodo, turning the matter aside once again. For I would learn more of Minas Ithil and Osgiliath, and Minas Tirith the long-enduring. What hope have you in that city in your long war? What hope have we, said Faramir? It is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it, but I do not think that it will do more than put off that evil day, unless other help unlooked for also comes from elves or men. For the enemy increases, and we decrease. We are a failing people, a springless autumn. The men of Númenor were settled far and wide on the shores of the seaward regions of the great lands, but for the most part they fell into evils and follies. Many became enamored in the darkness and the black arts. Some were given over wholly to idleness and ease, and some fought among themselves until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild men. It is not said that evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One was ever named in honor there, or that the old wisdom and beauty brought out of the west remained long in the realm of the sons of Elendil the Fair, and they linger there still. Yet even so it was Gondor that brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into dotage, and thinking that the enemy was asleep who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Númenorians still, as they had in their old kingdom, and so lost it, hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than the houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their descent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls musing in heraldry. In secret chambers withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last king of the line of Anarion had no heir. But the stewards were wiser and more fortunate, wiser for they recruited the strength of our people from the sturdy folk of the sea-coast, and from the hardy mountaineers of Ered Nimrais. And they made a truce with the proud peoples of the north, who often had assailed us, men of fierce valour, but of our kin from afar off, unlike the wild Easterlings or the cruel Haradrim. That he's talking about, by the way, the story of Eorl the Young and Cirion, which we'll get to when we read Unfinished Tales. So it came to pass in the days of Cirion in the days of Cirion the 12th steward, and my father is the 6th and 20th, that they rode to our aid, and at the great field of Celebrant they destroyed our enemies that had seized our northern provinces. These are the Rohirrim, as we now name them, masters of horses, and we ceded to them the fields of Calanathan, that are since called Rohan, for that province had long been sparsely peopled. And they became our allies, and have ever proven true to us, aiding us at need and guarding our northern marches from the gap of Rohan. Of our lore and manners they have learned what they would, and their lords speak our speech at need, yet for the most part they hold by the ways of their own fathers and to their own memories, and they speak among themselves their own north tongue. And we love them, tall men and fair women, valiant both alike, golden-haired, bright-eyed, and strong. They remind us of the youth of men, as they were in the elder days. Indeed, it is said by our lore-masters that they have from of old this affinity with us, that they are come from those same 3 houses of men, as were the Númenorians in their beginning, not from Hador the golden-haired, the elf-friend maybe, yet from such as his sons and people as went over the sea into the west, refusing the call. For so we reckon men in our law, calling them the high, or men of the west, which were Númenorians, and the middle peoples, men of the twilight, such as are the Rohirrim and their kin, that dwell still far in the north in the wild, the men of darkness. No, the Nameless One is Sauron. The only characters to directly talk about Morgoth in The Lord of the Rings is Aragorn, who calls him... Aragorn, he always calls Sauron the enemy. And when he speaks of Morgoth, he calls him the great enemy. And then there was Legolas, who just says Morgoth. He just calls him that right out. But no, he's talking about Sauron. Now, I just wanted to point out, he's sort of getting really wistful. He's like, oh man, Rohan's so great. You know, I really like Rohan. And he's going to marry a woman from Rohan. So, yeah. It's just a little foreshadowing there, I suppose, that he goes off on this tangent about Rohan. Yet now, if the Rohirrim are grown in some ways more like to us, enhanced in arts and gentleness, we too have become more like to them, and can scarce claim any longer the title High. We are become middlemen of the twilight, but with memory of other things, for as the Rohirrim do, we now love war and valor as things good in themselves, both a sport and an end. And though we still hold that a warrior should have more skills and knowledge than only the craft of weapons and slaying, we esteem a warrior none the less above men of other crafts, such as the need of our days. So even was my brother Boromir a man of prowess, and for that he was accounted the best man in Gondor, and very valiant indeed he was. No heir of Minas Tirith has for long years been so hardy in toil, so onward in battle or horn a mightier note on the great horn. Faramir, should have said, blown a mightier note on the great horn. Faramir sighed and fell silent for a while. Hey, Flower. Oh, well, good night. You have a good night, Flower. You don't say much in all your tales about the elves, sir, said Sam, suddenly plucking up courage. He had noted that Faramir seemed to refer to elves with reverence, and this even more than his courtesy and his food and wine had won Sam's respect and quieted his suspicions. No, indeed, Master Samwise, said Faramir, for I am not learned in elven lore. But there you touch upon another point in which we have changed, declining from Numenor to Middle-earth. For as you may know, if Mithrandir was your companion, and you have spoken with Elrond, the Edain, the fathers of the Númenóreans, fought beside the elves in the first wars, and were rewarded by the gift of the kingdom in the midst of the sea, within sight of Elvenhome. But in Middle-earth, men and elves become estranged in the days of darkness, by the arts of the enemy, and by the slow changes of time in which each kind walked further down their sundered roads. I have to correct myself there. Earlier I said that when he talks about Elvenhome, he must be talking about Eldamar. That's actually not likely to be true based on what he said here. Putting it into context, he's probably talking about Eressëa. You got a Moogle in your gift, so? Oh, that's nice. There you go. There you go. You are the master of Moogles. You should have all the Moogle emotes. Men now fear and misdoubt the elves, and yet know little of them, and we of Gondor grow like other men, like the men of Rohan, for even they, who are foes of the Dark Lord, shun the elves and speak of the Golden Wood with dread. Yeah, well, remember, not everybody in Númenor worshipped Morgoth. Remember, there were sort of two factions. There was the King's Men, and they were the ones who became the Black Númenóreans. They were the ones who went to the Temple of Melkor, and they worshipped Melkor, and they really were worshipping Sauron, because Sauron was the one who put it all up and built the Temple of Melkor, and told them that he was Melkor incarnate. What's really interesting about that, though, is that you have to remember there were also the faithful. And, the Númenor myth is very based in Atlantis. Even one of the other names for Númenor, Atalanta, very similar to Atlantis, which was actually a coincidence. Tolkien did not intend that, and he was very amused when he realized if you translated a certain way, you would get Atalanta. But in a way, the Akalabeth is also sort of like the Noah's Ark story in a way, with Elendil as being sort of like Noah, because they were already at sea. And so the faithful, they were the ones that were being persecuted in Numenor. They were the ones that were burned to death in the temples and sacrificed to Morgoth. But a lot of them, there were 9 ships of them, had come to Middle-earth, and there were some that already dwelled in Middle-earth. And unfortunately, there were some of the bad ones, too, that were already in Middle-earth. That's how you get people like Queen Beruthiel, but and some of the other people that Faramir was just speaking about, some of the men of Numenor who were wicked. But essentially what it comes down to is it's you have to remember there were those that remained faithful to the Valar, to the elves. And Faramir here is saying, hey, we look to the west, we look at where Numenor was and Elvenhome and what lies beyond it. And that's the closest to any sort of like religion that you see in Middle-earth. But remember, the whole thing was that Numenor was in turmoil. And so it wasn't that they all worshiped Morgoth. It was just that was sort of like the majority, we'll say. But there it wasn't all of them. And the ones that got out, were mostly the faithful. Not all of them were the faithful. There were some that were already in Middle-earth because the King's Men, the Black Numenorians, believed that they had the right to colonize Middle-earth, to make slaves of the people that lived there. So there were a lot of them that were already there. They were in places like Khand and Umbar and Mordor. Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about Gondor and Arnor. That is later. That is when Elendil got there, and even then, it wasn't Gondor and Arnor. It was the realm of Elendil. It wasn't until after Isildur died that it wound up being split into 2 pieces. Arnor being the Northland, Gondor being it doesn't mean Southland. You'd want it to. It means Land of Stone. But what I'm getting at, though, is like I said, there are Numenorians who had nothing to do with the worship of the devil, and they a lot of them died too. A lot of them were burned to death in the temple, but there were a lot of them that were with Elendil, and they sailed to Middle-earth, and that's where you get guys like Faramir and Aragorn, the good ones. It would have been interesting to see a Middle East if J.R.R. Tolkien was more into Greek mythology. If you think about the geography of it, the place that Frodo and Sam and Faramir and all where they are right now, Ithilien, is the closest thing there is to Greece in Middle-earth. As for like the Middle East, that would probably be like the area of like Khand, like just past Mordor. Mordor is like Eastern Europe, and if you go like kind of the south and the east, that's where Khand is. Were there Easterlings already in Middle-earth? Well, you have to remember that Easterling just means man from the east. So, yeah, of course there were. Anybody that's to the east is an Easterling. If you're talking about the specific sort of runic culture that we're seeing here, yeah, they would have been a bit more primitive, and they weren't yet already conquered by Sauron. But yeah, absolutely, yeah, they were there. I mean, even in the Silmarillion, you hear about Easterlings, although they're not the same thing as the Easterlings of the Third Age. If you read the Children of Húrin, they talk about the Easterlings being these sort of like barbarians from the east they would wear wolf pelts, and they were very nasty people, we'll say, right? They did a lot of terrible things. They were fully on Morgoth's side. But those guys were probably from Rovanion. They would have had more in common with Rohan than they would have had with the Easterlings of the Third Age. But this is Easterling, just like I said, it just means to the east. But yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Numenor, in their time, they explored almost the whole world. They saw the Burnt Lands, and they were in trade with these people. You have to remember that men were not indigenous to Numenor. They were indigenous to Middle-earth. Numenor was just, hey, after the War of Wrath happened, the Valar said, hey, for the men that helped us in the war that sided, against Morgoth, we're going to give you this special land. And not all of them went, and Faramir just said that. Not all of them went to Numenor, but a lot of them did. The Edain, the noble men. And so instead of Edain, which just means man, they became the Dunedain, which is man of the West, Western man. So if you think Dunedain and Easterling are sort of the opposite sort of things, It's just one is Elvish and the other is English. All right, let's continue here because it's getting late and we still have a little bit of this chapter left. This was a big chapter, The Window of the West. So there are going to be some streams where we only get through one. How's Bible study going? Hey, June. We're having a blast here, June, because we're at like one of my favorite characters here, Faramir. But yeah, to just put a cap on that question, you have to remember that, yeah, there was absolutely 100%, there was devil worship going on in Numenor. And it was most of them. It wasn't some, it was a lot of them, right? No, don't feel like you have to shush. Don't feel like you have to shush. But there were those that stayed faithful to their elves, to the Ainur, and to the One. Even the late kings, like Pharazôn, the last king of Numenor, right? He was pretty evil. He was a nasty fellow. He worshipped the devil. He made Sauron became like his best friend after a while. He went and tried to attack the Undying Lands, which is not only bad, but also really, really stupid, right? Like, what did you think was going to happen, man? But even he went through some of the motions of having his name inscribed in Elvish and oh wait, Hell to Vildo at his House of Cats. I just wrote a little bit about Tevildo today, Wayne. Meow, 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 indeed. Because somebody asked me, hey, what is up with why are cats in Tolkien stories, why are they always sort of nefarious and bad and dogs are good? And I said, I wish I could give you some mythic resonance here and tell you that there's some like really good reason, but really it just comes down to the author. He just didn't like cats. He was not a cat person. He was a dog person. He did write a little poem that some people misinterpreted, because some people said, well, he eventually got a cat. No, he never had a cat. Tolkien never had a cat. He wrote a poem that said J.R.R. Tolkien had a cat named Grimalkin, and that it used to belong to Herr Grimm. And to explain that, it was this tiny little poem that he put in one of his letters as a postscript. And Grimalkin is a word that comes from Shakespeare. It's derived from Grey Malkin. Malkin means friend. So you think, oh, friend, good, friendly. But really what he's saying is not friend as in somebody like Sam, but friend like, a familiar, like a witch's familiar, a hobgoblin or demonic presence that you might become friends with, that might look after you, you might look after it, but it's a strictly transactional sort of thing. And Sauron himself was based on some of these older characters that he wrote in his earliest stories. One was a necromancer named Thu, another was Tevildo, who was a giant talking cat. And then you see this sort of thought of that he was the devil's cat. And then Shelob, the big spider, right? Shelob's this big demon spider that Frodo and Sam are going to have to deal with, at the end of this book. And none of that doesn't go too well for them. But Shelob, Sauron thinks of Shelob as this outdoor cat type situation, right? We just let her, live where she lives. Occasionally we feed her, and that's it. Not really like a dog type situation where you have something that loves you unconditionally. And by the way, I know many people who keep cats as pets, and my sister has a cat. Her cat is great. I like cats. I have nothing against cats, but Tolkien didn't like cats, and that's what it really comes down. He just didn't like cats. He was a dog guy. As a matter of fact, one of his children's stories, which I will be reading to you guys at one point, is this little story called Rover Random, which was a story about a dog named Rover who got cursed by an evil wizard from Persia who turned him into a toy. And then he eventually got the curse lifted, and he went on all these crazy adventures. The wizard, by the way, he winds up reforming. He becomes a good wizard, and he opens up a shop in England that sells chocolate and cigarettes. Such a weird idea to me, but it was a different time. And anyway, the dog is telling the story, and then somebody had to get the Mirror of Rod's a Dragon Quest reference for you. The dog is telling the stories of adventures to this cat named Tinker, and the cat's like, you're full of it. You didn't do any of that stuff, And it's explained that the cat is just jealous of the dog because the dog got to do all this cool stuff, and the cat is just, sitting on its butt munching on Fancy Feast, I suppose. I had a cat in the past. Cats can be pretty great. I am more of a dog person than a cat person, but I do like cats. But yeah, it just comes up every once in a while. I mentioned Queen Beruthiel when we were talking about, how not everybody who came from Numenor was good. In fact, there were a lot of bad ones, and Faramir was just saying, hey, there were even people in Gondor that are kind of nasty. Queen Beruthiel, she was a queen of Gondor. And she was a piece of work. She was a black Numenorian, which means that she practiced black magic. And she hated cats. But cats loved her for some reason. And the way that Tolkien described this, he just says, there's just a certain type of person who hates cats. But then they're always jumping into that person's lap and sort of messing with them and following them around. And that's what Queen Beruthiel was like. He didn't say that in a letter. He said that to one of his students. And anyway, Queen Beruthiel had these cats that she would train them to go out and spy on people and learn all this nasty gossip, and then she would use it to, to mess with people. She was just a nasty piece of work. As a matter of fact, Beruthiel just basically is Lady of Wrath. And that's what they called her. That probably wasn't her real name. Because she was Black Numenorian, she would never have used a Sindarin name. She because they hated the elves. Anybody who practiced black magic doesn't like elves. And they don't like the languages that the elves come up with. So what it comes down to is, she was called basically Lady of Wrath, which is, I think that's pretty metal. By the people that, of Gondor, and she had her cat spy on people. Which, honestly, if you had a cat that could go out and find things out and then report them back to you, that's a pretty tempting thing, isn't it? Let's continue here. We only have a few more pages left to go. Let's see. All right, I don't want to... Oh, yeah, that's where I stopped because I corrected myself on something. But in Middle-earth, men and elves became estranged in the days of darkness by the arts of the enemy, and by the slow changes of time in which each kind walked further down their sundered roads. Men now fear and misdoubt the elves, and yet know little of them. And we of Gondor grow like other men, like the men of Rohan, for even they, who were foes of the Dark Lord, shun the elves and speak of the Golden Wood with dread. Which got Éomer into a bit of trouble because he said something, I don't want to say rude, but he said something very ignorant about Galadriel. And we talked about this, when it happened, but I want to bring it up again. The big mistake was that he said that in front of Gimli, and Gimli really didn't want to hear anything ignorant about Galadriel. And to Éomer's credit, he was very quick to apologize. He's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I was only speaking as everybody in my country speaks, which is not a good look, right? Let's continue. Yet there are those among us who still have some dealings with the elves when they may, and ever and anon will go in secret to Lorien, seldom to return. Not I, for I deem it perilous now for mortal men to willfully seek out the elder people. Yet I envy you that have spoken with the White Lady. The Lady of Lorien, Galadriel, cried Sam. You should see her, indeed you should, sir. I am only a hobbit, and gardening's my job at home, sir, if you understand me, and I'm not much good at poetry, not at making it, a bit of a comic rhyme perhaps now and again, you know, but not real poetry, so I can't tell you what I mean. It ought to be sung. You'd have to get Strider, Aragorn that is, or old Mr. Bilbo for that. But I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir, lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower, sometimes like a white daffodowndilly, small and slender like, hard as diamond, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost in the stars, proud and far off as Snow Mountain, and as merry as any lass as I saw with daisies in her hair in springtime. That's a lot of nonsense, and all wide of my mark. And she must be lovely indeed, said Faramir. Perilously fair. Well, I don't know about perilous, said Sam. It strikes me that folk takes their peril with them into Lorien, and finds it there because they've brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous because she's so strong in herself. You could dash yourself to pieces on her like a ship on a rock, or drown yourself like a hobbit in a river. But neither rock nor river would be to blame. Now, He stopped and went red in the face. Yes? Now, Boromir, you would say, said Faramir. What would you say? He took his peril with him? Yes, sir, begging your pardon, and a fine man as was your brother, if I may say so, but you've been warm on the scent all along. Now I watched Boromir and listened to him from Rivendell all down the road, looking after my master, as you'll understand it, not meaning any harm to Boromir, and it's my opinion that in Lorien he first saw clearly what I guessed sooner, what he wanted. From the moment he saw it, he wanted the enemy's ring. Sam! cried Frodo aghast. He had fallen deep into his own thoughts for a while and came out of them suddenly and too late. Save me, said Sam, turning white, and then flushing scarlet. There I go again. When will you ever open your big mouth and put your foot in it, the gaffer used to say to me, and right enough. Oh dear, oh dear. Now look here, sir. He turned, facing up to Faramir with all the courage that he could muster. Don't you go taking advantage of my master because his servant's no better than a fool. You've spoken very handsome all along, put me off my guard talking of elves and all, but handsome is as handsome does, we say. Now's a chance to show your quality. So it seems, said Faramir, slowly and very softly, with a strange smile. So that is the answer to all the riddles, the one ring that was thought to have perished from the world. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you 2 halflings and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings. A pretty stroke of fortune. A chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality. Ha! He stood up very tall and stern, his grey eyes glinting. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools and set themselves side by side with their backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. There was a silence. All the men in the cave stopped talking and looked toward them in wonder. But Faramir sat down again in his chair and began to laugh quietly, and then suddenly became grave again. Alas for Boromir! It was too sore a trial, he said. How you have increased my sorrow, you 2 strange wanderers from a far country, bearing the peril of man. But you are less judges of men than I of halflings. We are truth speakers, we men of Gondor. We boast seldom, and then perform or die in the attempt. Not if I found it on the highway would I take it, I said, even if I was such a man as to desire this thing. And even though I knew not clearly what this thing was when I spoke of it, still I should take those words as a vow, and be held by them. But I am not such a man, or I am wise enough to know that there are some perils from which a man must flee. Sit at peace, and be comforted, Samwise. If you seem to have stumbled, think that it was fated to be so. Your heart is shrewd as well as faithful, and saw clearer than your eyes, for strange though it may seem, it was safe to declare this to me. It may even help the master that you love. It shall turn to his good if it is in my power, so be comforted. But do not name this thing again aloud. Once is enough. I do want to return to that, but let me finish because we're just about done with the chapter, and then I'm going to come back to what he just said. The hobbits came back to their seats and sat very quiet. Men turned back to their drink and their talk, perceiving that their captain had had some jest or other with little guests, and that it was over. "Well, Frodo, now at last we understand one another," said Faramir. "If you took this thing on yourself, unwilling at others' asking, then you have pity and honour from me. And I marvel at you to keep it hid and not to use it. You are a new people in a new world to me. Are all your kin of like sort? Your land must be a realm of peace and content, and there must gardeners be in high honour." "Not all is well there," said Frodo, "but certainly gardeners are honoured. But folk must grow weary there, even in their gardens, to do all the things under the sun of this world, and you are far from home and wayworn. No more tonight. Sleep, both of you, in peace if you can. Fear not, I do not wish to see it or touch it, or to know more of it than I know, which is enough, lest peril perchance waylay me, and I fall lower into the test than Frodo, son of Drogo. Go now to rest, but first, tell me only, if you will, whither you wish to go, and what to do, for I must watch and wait and think. Time passes. In the morning we must each go swiftly on the ways appointed to us." Frodo had felt himself trembling at the first shock of fear past. Now a great weariness came down on him like a cloud. He could dissemble and resist no longer. "I was going to find a way into Mordor," he said faintly. "I was going to Gorgoroth. I must find the mountain of fire and cast the thing into the gulf of doom. Gandalf said so. I do not think I shall ever get there." Faramir stared at him for a moment in grave astonishment. Then suddenly he caught him as he swayed, and lifting him gently, carried him to the bed and laid him there and covered him warmly. At once he fell into a deep sleep. Another bed was set beside him for his servant. Sam hesitated for a moment, then bowing very low, "Good night, Captain, my lord," he said. "You took the chance, sir." "Did I so?" said Faramir. "You, sir?" "Yes, sir, and showed your quality, the very highest." Faramir smiled. "A pert servant, Master Samwise, but nay, the praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards." Yet there was naught to this praise. I had no lure or desire to do other than I have done. "Ah, well, sir," said Sam. "You said my master had an elvish air, and that was very good and true, but I can say this, you too have an air, sir, that reminds me of Gandalf of wizards." "Maybe," said Faramir. "Maybe you discern from far away the air of Numenor. Good night." That's the end of that. That's the end of Chapter 5. We're not going to be able to do any more today. But I wanted to talk about... we don't have a whole lot of chapters left. We have the Forbidden Pool. We have Journey to the Crossroads. We have the Stairs of Cirith We have Shelob's Lair. And we have the choices of Master Samwise, and that will actually be the end of the Two Towers. No, that wasn't Lady of Cats. It was Lady of Wrath, like anger and hatred. I wanted to come back to something that Faramir had said here, where he says, maybe, you might be thinking that blurting out what you said about the ring was very foolish, but you know what? I don't think it was. I think that it's interesting that you did that. I think that your heart was smarter than your brain in that case, and it was actually very safe to say that around me. And it's sort of an interesting thing that Faramir says that because he's so confident, right? Aragorn once said something kind of the opposite, actually, when Frodo had done something like that. Frodo blurted out that Galadriel had a ring of power. And Aragorn didn't know that and said, "You really shouldn't have said that, not even to me. That's something that really should have been kept a secret." And that's actually, it's a different situation, because the fact that Galadriel has Nenya is something that almost nobody in the world knows. Almost nobody in the world knows. The person who gave it to her was Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor died, so he's in the West. He's done, right? He's not coming back to Middle-earth. Other than that, who would know that she has this ring? I would say that there are exactly 3 people that know that, and I'm not counting Frodo and Sam. I'm talking about before that. One would be Elrond, another would be Gandalf, and the last one would be her husband, Celeborn. But although maybe, I don't know, maybe Sid would disagree with me on that. I'd have to ask him what he thinks. Yeah, I think that Sid would probably say that Celeborn has no idea that his wife has one of the rings of power. I think he has to know personally, but I'd have to ask him if that's what he thinks. But anyway, it's just sort of an interesting thing is that in that case, it was Frodo who was speaking out of turn and getting sort of this rebuke from Aragorn and saying, really, don't ever say that again. And here it's Sam speaking out of turn in a very different situation, but Sam speaking out of turn and Faramir saying, you know what, that might be for the best because now I know how I can help you. Now I know what I have. Because in this moment, like he's made up his mind. He's been trying to think, what am I going to do with these two? Am I going to just let them go wherever they need to go, just like cut them loose and let them go? Or am I going to do what my father would want me to do and take them to Minas Tirith? And then he knows what's going to happen now that he knows what Isildur's Bane is, that it's the One Ring. He's like, oh, no. Danger, danger, danger. If that thing goes to Minas Tirith, only bad things. Nothing good will come of that. What would have happened if Sauron found out she had the ring? Well, he would do anything to get his hands on that one, you know. Those three, because you have to remember, when he made the One Ring, he knew that there were 16 out there. And he makes the One Ring, he enchants it, he puts it on his finger, he speaks the enchantment into it. And suddenly he's aware, whoa, 19 rings? That's real interesting. And he could tell that those three were different, that they were much more powerful. And he gets very frustrated that he can't find them. He tortures Celebrimbor to death, kills him with a spear, and then goes around using that spear with Celebrimbor's body on the end of it like a bludgeon to kill other people with. I mean, that's a rage that you rarely see in a character like Sauron, because you wouldn't tell him where those three were. So yeah, if he knew that one of the three was held by Galadriel, he would probably put everything into attacking Galadriel. He really wants those three rings. Because they're the most powerful. So if he gave those to men and turned them into Nazgul, he would have... okay, let's say he gets his hands on Nenya. That's not even the greatest of the three. The one Elrond has is the most powerful. But let's say he gets Galadriel's ring. He gives it to some guy, like the Mouth of Sauron or somebody, right? He's going to have a Nazgul that's going to be like the Witch King times 7. You know what I mean? It's going to be a major, major player, and it's going to make him win the war all that much faster. So, yeah, that's the reason that they keep it a secret. They don't wear these rings because until they felt it was safe to do so. And by the way, that wasn't Sauron losing the war at the end of the Second Age, because they still didn't use them until they were sure that the One Ring was gone and wasn't going to be found. And then, suddenly a hobbit finds it, and, things are a little different. And, and Galadriel even told Frodo how the One Ring works and how it relates to the others and what he would have to do to use it, But anyway, what I'm getting at here is that's like sort of like the disaster scenario. There are a lot of things that Sauron just doesn't know, and if he found out, would be completely disastrous. One of the biggest bits of knowledge, and I talked about this once, both on Quora and on YouTube. I talked about this, that one of the worst scenarios that could happen was if he found out that there were two different Bagginses, Because he learned about Baggins from Gollum. And as far as he knows, there's just some guy who's a hobbit named Baggins who lives in a place called the Shire. He's talking about Bilbo, because Frodo wasn't, Frodo was only a baby when this all went down. If he found out that Bilbo and Frodo were not the same person, that it was a completely different guy who just happened to have the same last name, that would have been the worst thing that he could have found out, because then he would have been like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that one of these hobbits willingly gave the ring to another? He would have razed the Shire to the ground, because that would have made him incredibly afraid of hobbits. He was already afraid of Gollum. There was something really weird about Gollum that creeped him out. So now he's like, wait a minute. So they're not all like this Gollum creature? So you're telling me that they could be strong enough to pass that much power to another peacefully? Whoa. I think that would have messed with Sauron. He would have razed the Shire to the ground. It would be gone. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have been find the ring bearer and bring him to me. It would have been kill every hobbit and then sift through the wreckage and find the ring. Did he realize that Gollum was a hobbit? Oh, that's a good question. I mean, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He is a whole lot smarter than, most people are. He is, he's an angel. So when he looks at Gollum, he might be seeing more than just Gollum's body. He might be seeing his soul too. But also, Gollum's the only hobbit he ever met until Pippin. Pippin contacted him accidentally. You know what I mean? So it's possible. Here's the thing. Does Gollum even know that he's a hobbit? I mean, they didn't use that word. They called themselves the river people, the Stoors. Hobbits was something that, the word hobbit, which means somebody who burrows into a hole and lives in it, that was originally, the Harfoots were called that. And then when they all started building holes. But then again, Gollum's people lived in holes too, so it's possible. I don't think the word existed, but I think that, it is mentioned by Gandalf that Gollum's people did dig holes and live in them, just like the Shire hobbits, because they were once Shire hobbits, Saruman knows about the Fellowship and was aligned with Sauron, so it was assumed that Bilbo... okay, so Saruman's not aligned with Sauron. That's the big mistake. Saruman is aligned with Saruman. You have to understand that he thinks that everything he's doing is his job. He was put in Middle-earth as an incarnate to defeat Sauron. And he has come to the conclusion that the only way to do that is from within. So he has this thought of, we'll ally with the Dark Lord, we'll get in his good graces, and then we'll topple him. Yeah. So, and Saruman, he's a big liar. He's quite crazy in the end. You're being too kind. He was a raving lunatic. And we'll get to that. Especially the things that he said to Galadriel. He was a raving lunatic. To say he was quite crazy is sort of like saying that I might be slightly hairy. If you know what I'm saying. Not Scottie Pippen, no. That I always thought that was funny that there was a guy in the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls, who was named Scottie Pippen. I'm like, he seems too tall to be a hobbit. Whereas Pippin's a nickname. You have to remember his real name's Peregrine. But Scottie Pippen, that's funny. Somebody should draw that, and not with AI, like a real drawing. Like Scottie Pippen as a hobbit, smoking pipe weed and got big hairy feet. But anyway, Yeah, Saruman was just a raving lunatic by the end. He was broken because he was faced with the reality that he was a fool, and that Gandalf was right yet again, and that he had been bested by a bunch of little dudes with hairy feet and some tree giants, which is kind of wild, right? These wizards can fling fire, but they're one of them's the greatest of them, bested by trees. Well, not that the Ents are trees, but they're tree giant. They're tree-ish, as they say. That's what Treebeard was like. Some of us have become rather tree-ish. I would love to have met C.S. Lewis and talked to him like that. C.S. Lewis died before I was born, but still. Treebeard was based on C.S. Lewis. Anyway, that's going to be it. Let's go over things schedule-wise. So for those of you that are watching me on Twitch, you guys know that I stream every day. I will be live tomorrow. We will be playing Dragon Quest II. And of course, Saturday night, we have Xenoblade, Torna, Golden Country. Sunday night, we're starting a Mega Man X command mission. Monday afternoon, Street Fighter 6. Tuesday night's Hollow Knight Silksong. We're going to start that. Wednesday afternoon will be Power Wash Simulator 2. And then Thursday, a week from today, we have the List Critics. So I won't be live on YouTube a week from today because we have the List Critics podcast. But in 2 weeks, on February 5th, the Council of Tolkien will return. That's me and Matt and Sid. I really have to call Matt because he hasn't answered my last email. And I know that he's been in the progress. If you guys might have noticed in the last episode of the Council of Tolkien, he was in a different sort of room. That's because he's moved to a new house. So I know that he's still dealing with a lot of the after effects of having to move to a different house and everything. But I got to call him and make sure he's good to go and everything. Thank you, Chewy. I just spoke to Sid just a few days ago. By the way, neither of them have sent me their casting lists. That's why I was emailing them. I was like, hey, guys, I really need that because I need to make an edited video version of that. And Sid sent me an old version of it that was not complete. And I said, hey, that's not complete, but he wasn't feeling well. So thank you for coming. I'm going to do a little ending spiel, and then we're going to be raiding on Twitch. On YouTube, it just ends. I can't raid. I wish I could take you guys along on a raid, but YouTube doesn't have raids, and I can't shunt you over to Twitch. But I'm going to do a little ending spiel here. So if you've been watching, just like I said, if you're watching on Twitch and you like what you see, just consider subscriptions. It helps support me. If you're watching on YouTube, just consider membership. It does help support me. You see people like Chewy Bautista there in the chat who has the little icon there, that little Gandalf G-rune there. Oh man, Dragon Quest VIII is one of my favorites. Brian, I'm playing 2 HD 2D tomorrow on Twitch. If you're interested, I'll put my Twitch link in the chat here for anybody who wants to come over and watch. Yeah, 8 is one of my very favorite. Dragon Quest is my favorite series of games, just in general, But like I said, consider membership, especially since there are going to be more and more perks because and we talked about this at the beginning of the stream. Some of the videos I'm not able to monetize because of copyright concerns, like playing the Two Towers, playing the Return of the King, and eventually movie stuff. You never even played 2? Well, this is the way to play it, is the HD 2D remake. It's a lot. It's a lot elevated, I'll just say. Just come on by tomorrow if you're interested. And But yeah, there are going to be some more lives that are members only. Not that I could stream to only members. I wouldn't do that because that would be cutting out a lot of people. But I'm talking about afterwards. This live will be members only for a little while, and then everybody will be able to see it. But with stuff that I can't run ads on, I'm going to have to say that will just be for members only. or there will be ads on it, but I don't get anything from it, you know. So like I said, just consider memberships. I'm going to have to push memberships more because of that. But anyway, guys, let's find out who we're going to raid on Twitch, though. Where are we going today? And for those of you on YouTube, I will see you in 2 weeks. We'll have Matt and Sid with me. I see Amethyst is on. I think we'll just raid her. She's playing Hollow Knight Silksong, which I'm starting that in a few days. Excited. Let's do that real quick. I want to see that Scottie Pippen thing. But not like AI. I mean, like real art. Let's see. Let's make that the raid call. Okay. All right, I'm putting the raid call in. Those of you who are on Twitch, you know the procedure. Just copy that, paste it as we head into Amethyst stream. She is playing Hollow Knight Silksong. For those of you joining that are watching on YouTube, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Of course, yeah, I mean there'll be videos up in the meantimes on Wednesdays and on Fridays and such. So I'll see you around that for those too. And here we go.